Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Before you drift off, I thought it would be a nice idea if you can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from. Right, let's get comfy and relax and let's begin. I had been driving for hours, the hum of the tires on the asphalt a kind of monotonous lull that made the night seem longer than it was. My GPS insisted I stay on the main highway, but a construction detour forced me onto a smaller exit I didn't recognize. I didn't mind at first. The road was quiet, lined with the skeletal remains of trees, their branches scraping against the windshield in the wind. It felt secluded, yes, but peaceful. There was a thrill in finding a road so deserted at 2 in the morning. The streetlights were sparse, flickering intermittently, and their weak glow barely touched the asphalt. I could see the outline of a town in the distance, though it was impossible to tell how far. I pressed on, expecting the road to widen or the GPS to recalibrate. But the road didn't widen. The town didn't appear. What I saw instead made my stomach twist. The first car was just parked at the side of the road. Its headlights were off, but it wasn't abandoned. A figure was seated inside, staring straight ahead or perhaps staring at me. At first, I thought it was a trick of the shadows, the reflection of the trees in the windshield, but the posture, the stillness, felt deliberate. My pulse quickened. I blinked, shook my head, and kept driving. Surely, it was someone resting, waiting for a friend, or maybe it had broken down. Then there was another car. And another. And another. They stretched on, one after the other, hundreds of them, lining both sides of the road. The figures inside didn't move. They didn't even blink. They simply sat, motionless, watching me. Their faces were obscured by shadows, but the stillness felt intelligent. They were aware of me. A chill ran down my spine. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a junkyard of old cars, mannequins, something explainable, but the human shapes behind the windshields defied any explanation. I slowed down, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Each car I passed, I felt their gaze boring into me. I checked my mirrors compulsively, my eyes darting from rear view to side mirror. None of them moved, but I could feel the collective attention. It pressed down on me, a suffocating weight. My rational mind screamed at me to keep moving, to ignore it, but something deep in me knew I was no longer on a normal road. A sudden noise made me jolt. A faint scraping, like metal against asphalt. I glanced to my right. One of the cars had its window slightly down. A hand, pale, thin, motionless, hung from the frame. My heart leapt. I told myself it was the wind, or maybe an accident of the trees brushing against the vehicle, but my voice sounded hollow even to me. I pressed the accelerator. The next turn was supposed to bring me to a small overpass, according to the GPS, but it didn't appear. The road twisted unnaturally, looping back on itself as if I were driving in circles. Panic began to creep in, knotting my stomach. I glanced at the dashboard. My fuel gauge had dropped inexplicably fast, as if the car itself were resisting me. Then I noticed movement. Just a flicker at first, a head turning, eyes glinting in the dim light. Every car I passed after that seemed to mimic the last. Heads slowly rotated, almost imperceptibly, following my car. I forced my hands to stay steady on the wheel, telling myself it was exhaustion, hallucination. I had been driving for nearly 12 hours. My body was tired. That had to be it. But the next car confirmed my worst fears. A figure stood up abruptly inside, tall and lanky, pressing its face to the windshield. Its eyes were wide, unblinking, and a low, guttural sound emanated from it, not quite a growl, not quite a whisper. I screamed. I hit the gas. The road began to narrow, the trees pressing closer to the asphalt, branches clawing at the car. The figures didn't stay in their vehicles anymore. They moved. One car, then another, had doors swinging open, occupants stepping onto the pavement silently, moving in perfect, unnatural synchrony. They didn't run, didn't make a sound, but they advanced steadily, cutting off any chance of escape. I swerved, trying to dodge them, my tires skidding on the loose gravel at the road's edge. My eyes burned, tears streaming down my face, but I could still see them, dozens of shadowed figures, some barely humanoid in their stiffness, all converging on me with patient, relentless determination. Then my car stalled. A mechanical deathly cough, then silence. I tried to restart it. Nothing. The figures were closer now, stepping lightly, as if their feet barely touched the road. I locked the doors, heart hammering in my chest, hands trembling violently. It was then I noticed their faces. When they leaned closer, the faint glow of the moon illuminated skin stretched too tight, eyes too large, teeth too white and sharp. They weren't human, not really. They were some grotesque mimicry, an imitation of people, watching, waiting, and now closing in. I didn't think. I forced the door open and ran into the woods. Branches whipped my face, thorns tore my clothes, and every step I took seemed slower than the last, as if the forest itself resisted me. Behind me, faint metallic taps echoed. They weren't running, they never ran, but they followed. I didn't dare look back. Hours or maybe minutes, I couldn't tell, passed in a blur of cold, mud, and terror. Eventually, I stumbled onto a paved road lit by neon signs, a small gas station. I burst inside, slamming the door. The attendant looked at me, blankly, a cigarette dangling from his lips. I tried to explain, but the words faltered. The figures hadn't followed me here. Not yet. I stayed inside until dawn, refusing to leave. When the sun finally rose, I stepped outside. The road I had come from was empty, ordinary. No cars, no figures, nothing but asphalt stretching into the distance. My hands shook as I locked the station's door behind me. I never found out exactly what I had driven into that night, and I don't want to. But I know this, if I ever see that exit again, I'll turn the other way. Some roads are not meant to be taken, and some eyes are meant to remain unseen. I survived that night, yes, but every time I drive alone after dark, I feel it watching, patient, waiting for the moment I make one wrong turn again. And I will, eventually. I had been driving all afternoon, the kind of long, monotonous stretch that lulls you into thinking you're invincible. My destination was a small cabin on the edge of the county, a quiet place to escape work and emails and phone calls. The GPS guided me well enough, but a construction detour appeared suddenly, a patch of orange cones forcing me off the highway. At first, I didn't mind. The new route was lined with dense trees, the sunlight dappled on the asphalt, and I told myself I could enjoy a scenic drive. A few miles in, the road narrowed. It wasn't paved anymore, just packed dirt with a thin layer of gravel. I hesitated, glancing at the GPS recalculating, it said, cheerfully ignoring my misgivings. I pressed on. The trees grew closer, their branches scraping faintly against the side mirrors. The sun dipped lower, shadows lengthening into shapes that seemed too deliberate. I shook my head, chuckling nervously. My imagination was acting up. That had to be it. A few bends later, I noticed tire tracks beside mine, fresh, wide, deep. Someone had driven this road recently. My stomach clenched, but I tried to rationalize it. A local? A truck? Nothing more. Then I saw it, a dark pickup truck emerging from the tree line behind me. It was too close, following, maintaining a precise distance. I slowed. The truck slowed. I sped up. It did the same. A creeping unease settled over me. Maybe it's just someone else rerouted by the detour, I muttered to myself, but my voice sounded hollow. I wanted to ignore it, to focus on the GPS, but every glance in the rearview mirror tightened the knot in my chest. The truck's headlights glinted intermittently through the trees, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a figure staring directly at me. Then it disappeared, lost in the shadows of the cab. The dirt road twisted again, and I could see the end, or at least the promise of it, a faint glimmer of paved road ahead, the kind of curve that signaled safety. Relief surged through me, but it was short-lived. As I approached, the truck roared past me, accelerating, then swung in front of me with a screech that sent gravel flying. I slammed on the brakes. My tires skidded, leaving deep ruts. The truck stopped, blocking the only way back. Its engine idled like a predator waiting. I sat frozen, hands gripping the steering wheel. My mind raced. Rational explanations tumbled over one another. A delivery truck lost? Some frustrated commuter? But nothing could explain the way the cab seemed impossibly large, the darkness inside impenetrable, and the way the truck's lights glinted like eyes in a predator's stare. I tried the horn. Nothing. I tried shifting into reverse. The truck rolled slightly forward, nudging my bumper, a subtle, deliberate warning. I forced myself to breathe. Maybe if I waited, the driver would turn off, leave me alone. I watched the shadows, counting seconds that stretched into minutes. Then movement, a figure stepping out, slow, deliberate, silent. My pulse jumped into my throat. It wasn't a normal gait. The silhouette was wrong, elongated arms, stiff, unnatural. The figure stopped just beyond the truck, staring. I could feel the weight of its gaze even in the dimming light. I tried to reason with myself. "It's a man," I whispered. "Someone just lost, maybe wants directions." But my heart wouldn't slow, my rational mind buckling under the suffocating dread. The figure's head tilted slightly, as though it were considering me. Its eyes glinted white, and for a second I swore they were too large, too still, staring into me rather than at me. I tried the door handle. Locked. Of course it was locked. My car was my only shield. The figure moved again. A faint scraping sound, like nails on concrete, though the dirt should have muffled everything. I pressed my back into the seat, trying to make myself small, invisible. The truck's engine hummed, steady, patient. The figure didn't approach immediately but circled the cab, deliberately slow, like a cat circling prey. My fingers found the key in the ignition. My plan was simple: floor it, ram past the truck if I had to, leave this nightmare behind. I slammed the pedal down. The truck reacted immediately, sliding into motion to block me, tires throwing up clouds of dust. I swerved, hucking the edges of the road. The figure raised its arms, unnaturally long now, stretched to a grotesque proportion, and I felt a thrill of panic as the shadowy limbs seemed to scrape the side of my car. Metal groaned under the touch. My stomach churned. The road narrowed even more, trees pressing close. There was no escape, no rational exit. Then, a clearing appeared. The dirt road ended at a small, abandoned gas station, lights flickering but functional. I veered toward it, tires skidding across gravel, and the truck hesitated. It didn't move as fast. My car crashed through the entrance, spinning slightly, and I slammed the doors. I dared to glance out the windshield. The figure was gone. The truck was stationary, engine idling, but unmoving. I couldn't see anyone inside. My chest heaved, my hands trembling violently. I didn't stop until I reached the main highway several miles later. The sun had fully set by then, leaving a sky smeared with indigo and the faint glow of distant town lights. Every rational thought in me screamed that what I had seen had a simple explanation, but I knew better. There was nothing human in the way the figure moved, nothing logical about the truck's behavior. I eventually made it to the cabin. I slept fitfully, windows locked, doors chained. I never took that back road again. Even months later, I can feel the presence of that truck, patient, waiting just beyond the shadows. It wasn't just a lost driver. It was something deliberate, aware, predatory. I survived that night. I escaped. But the memory of those elongated limbs and the glinting eyes behind the truck's windshield is etched into me, unshakable. And I know, if I ever make one wrong turn again, it will be waiting, patient, calculating, ready to remind me that some roads are not meant to be traveled. I had been driving for hours, my body vibrating from the endless monotony of the highway. The sun had long since set, leaving the road bathed in the dull, artificial glare of my headlights. My plan was simple: reach my sister's place in the neighboring county before nightfall turned into something unmanageable. I'd been on this route countless times, but a construction detour forced me off the main road. The GPS cheerfully instructed me to take the next right, and I obeyed, thinking nothing of it. At first, the neighborhood looked harmless. Small houses lined a narrow street, neat lawns and picket fences illuminated by the occasional streetlight. But something felt off. The houses were too quiet. No distant television hum, no barking dogs, no wind chimes or rustling leaves, just an oppressive silence that seemed to press against the car from every side. I noticed it first on the second block, a faint silhouette at a window, just barely visible, pressed against the glass. I blinked, expecting it to vanish. It didn't. Another window, another figure. And another. My chest tightened. I tried to rationalize. Maybe someone had visitors, someone was up late, maybe it was a trick of the shadows. But the windows all contained figures. Motionless, watching. I slowed my car instinctively, trying not to stare, trying to convince myself I was imagining it. Each turn revealed more faces, all pressed against their respective windows, eyes following the car with unnerving precision. I checked my mirrors, half expecting the street to empty behind me. But the rear view reflected more of the same dark silhouettes observing, heads tilting as I moved. Panic started to creep in. My pulse quickened, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I forced myself to breathe evenly. I told myself it was coincidence, the trick of shadows, reflections, tired eyes misinterpreting shapes. Rational explanations. But the weight of those gazes made my stomach clench. Each blink, each turn of the wheel, felt like I was being measured, assessed. The street narrowed, forcing me to drive slowly. I could hear the tires crunch on gravel patches hidden beneath the asphalt. Every few houses, a single light flickered, too brief, too rhythmic to be normal flickering bulbs. It felt like a heartbeat, counting my approach. I told myself it was nothing, a loose wire maybe. But my mind didn't accept it. Then I saw movement. A hand pressed against a window pane, fingers splayed unnaturally wide. I yanked the wheel slightly, nearly hitting the curb. My heart was hammering in my chest, each beat loud enough to echo in my ears. I tried to call my sister. No signal. Not even a trace. The neighborhood had become an island, disconnected from the world I knew. I considered turning around, but the street seemed to stretch endlessly. Each time I tried, a narrow side street or blocked driveway made a full U-turn impossible. The houses formed a corridor of silent observers. Faces, more detailed now, some with hollow eyes, others with mouths slightly open as though breathing me in, unblinking, unfeeling. My rational mind scrambled. Maybe they were mannequins, dolls, someone's bizarre decoration. But the movements, however subtle, were alive. They followed me. I pressed the accelerator, hoping to escape this suffocating street. The headlights caught more than I wanted to see: children. Shadows too small to be adults, peering out with intensity that made my stomach churn. Windows reflected the light back, highlighting dozens of faces at once, all converging, all waiting. I forced my gaze forward, counting the houses, calculating the distance to the end of the street. It should have been a short block. It wasn't. The road twisted again, and I realized I had passed the same houses multiple times. Patterns repeated: the same crooked fence, the same mailbox, the same burned-out street lamp. I must have been driving in circles. My breath caught in my throat. There was no way out. I considered stopping the car, sitting in the middle of the street and hoping it was a dream. But the eyes, countless, unblinking, made that impossible. I tried honking. Short bursts. Long bursts. Nothing. The silence persisted, punctuated only by the faint creak of an unseen hinge, the occasional scrape of feet against wood floors. The shadows shifted slightly, ever so slightly, in perfect unison. I could feel their anticipation, pressing in from all sides. Rational thought had abandoned me. Then one figure moved more boldly than the others. A tall, thin silhouette stepped away from the window, standing in the middle of the yard. It tilted its head, staring directly at me. And as I watched, more began to do the same, emerging from the windows, stepping out onto the lawns. Their movements were coordinated, unnatural. The streetlights flickered violently, shadows leaping across their bodies, and I realized something horrifying. I was surrounded, trapped in a living corridor of watchers. I floored the accelerator. Tires screamed against asphalt, the engine roared. The figures didn't retreat. Some raised their arms, hands stretching in ways that seemed wrong, elongated, claw-like. I swerved, narrowly avoiding a small child or something that resembled a child standing silently in the road. Its eyes reflected the headlights, a cold, impossible white. Then, a break, the street finally opened onto a wider road. I hit the gas, tires skidding as I left the neighborhood behind. Houses receded into darkness, and slowly, the oppressive weight of countless eyes began to lift. My body shook violently as the adrenaline faded. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Not a single window held a figure now. Only the familiar emptiness of suburbia under the dim glow of streetlights. I didn't stop until I reached the main highway, where cars moved normally, drivers oblivious to the nightmarish street I had escaped. My hands were raw from gripping the steering wheel, and my head throbbed from tension. I called my sister immediately, and when I told her what had happened, she laughed nervously. Desolate neighborhood, huh? Maybe you were just tired. You should rest. I didn't believe her. I've tried to rationalize it, to chalk it up to stress or exhaustion, but deep down I know what I saw. Every window. Every face. Watching. Waiting. I've moved since then, never driving alone at night again, but I can't shake the feeling that those eyes are still out there, somewhere, and that one day, if I take a wrong turn, I'll find that street again. And this time, I might not get out. I had been driving for hours, the kind of day where fatigue presses against your bones and the world blurs into a dull, gray hum. The GPS had guided me flawlessly along the main roads, but a sudden detour forced me onto a smaller street I had never noticed before. It wasn't on any of my usual routes, and the evening air had already thickened with the approaching night. At first, I thought nothing of it. It was a quiet street, lined with neat houses and manicured lawns, and I told myself that a minor detour couldn't be dangerous. The street was eerily still. Every house had its porch light off, and the windows were dark and vacant. No television glow, no distant music, not even the flicker of a passing car. The silence pressed against the car, a weight I could almost feel. I glanced at the GPS. The turn I had just taken would reconnect me with the main road in half a mile. Easy. Ordinary. Nothing to worry about. And then I saw the first house with its lights on. One porch illuminated by a single yellow bulb, casting long shadows across the driveway. A figure stood there, motionless. I thought at first it was a neighbor or someone waiting for a friend, but there was something off. The posture was too stiff, the figure too still. I slowed the car instinctively, my hands tightening around the wheel. As I passed, the figure didn't move. Didn't wave, didn't acknowledge me. Just stood there, staring. A chill ran down my spine. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were checking a phone. Maybe someone had been waiting for an Uber. But the stillness, the intensity of that gaze, made my chest tighten. I kept driving. The houses continued, each one dark and silent. But every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, I had the unsettling impression that the figure in the driveway was moving, stepping closer to the street, though the distance should have made that impossible. I blinked. It hadn't moved. But the feeling lingered, a gnawing dread that burrowed into the base of my skull. I considered turning around, but the street curved in such a way that a simple U-turn wasn't possible. The pavement narrowed, flanked on both sides by low fences and dense hedges. My heart began to pound, each thump loud in the quiet car. My rational mind fought back. Maybe I was tired. Maybe my imagination had filled in the gaps. That had to be it. Then the figure raised a hand, slowly, deliberately. Not a wave. Not a greeting. Just lifted it in a rigid, vertical line, fingers extended. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I tried to tell myself it was a normal gesture, that I was overreacting. But the shape of the hand, the unnatural stillness of the figure, made me doubt every sane explanation. I glanced at my phone for the time, hoping to distract myself, and that's when I noticed the shadows. The streetlight closest to the house flickered weakly, and for the briefest moment, I saw movement behind the windows of the surrounding houses. Shapes shifting, dark forms pressing close to the glass. I shook my head. No. I must be imagining it. My pulse raced. My foot hovered over the gas pedal. I wanted to leave. I needed to leave. But the street seemed to stretch endlessly. Every turn brought me past the same dark houses, the same empty lawns. And the figure in the driveway, always there, always waiting. I considered screaming, but my voice caught in my throat. I passed the house again. This time, the figure was closer to the street, standing near the curb. My hand shook violently on the wheel. I tried to start the car, to accelerate, to escape, but the engine hesitated, coughed, and refused. My stomach dropped. I wasn't going anywhere. A low, deliberate sound reached my ears, footsteps, slow and even, crunching against gravel. Behind me? In front of me? I didn't dare look. The street seemed to hold its breath. I told myself to remain calm, to think, but rationality was slipping through my fingers like smoke. The figure began walking toward me, one slow step at a time. I could see the outline now, tall, thin, unnaturally straight. The porch light cast a harsh shadow, stretching its form toward me, growing larger with every step. My chest constricted. I tried to restart the car again. The engine turned over once, twice, and then, miracle, caught. I floored the accelerator. Tires screeched on asphalt, and the car lurched forward, narrowly missing the figure as it stepped onto the street. Its head tilted unnaturally, eyes too bright, too unblinking, fixed on me. I didn't look back. Every instinct screamed at me to keep moving. The street narrowed even further, hedges clawing at the sides of the car. My headlights caught glimpses of more figures, emerging from the darkness behind fences, shadows peeling off the walls. I risked a glance in the rearview mirror. One figure had appeared there too, standing impossibly still on the sidewalk behind me. It raised its hand, mirroring the one in the driveway. I screamed, my voice raw and hoarse, and pressed harder on the pedal. Finally, the street opened onto a wider road, illuminated by streetlights and the occasional passing car. I didn't slow until I was several blocks away, heart hammering, hands raw from gripping the steering wheel. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of it, trying to rationalize it, but the image of that figure, standing perfectly still, waiting, haunted me. I never took that street again. Weeks later, I drove past the neighborhood during the day. Every house was normal, porch lights flickering on timers, children playing, mailboxes neatly aligned. No figures. No shadows pressed against windows. Nothing. I have no explanation for what I saw that night. Rational thought fails me. All I know is that when I drive alone after dark, I feel it, the sense of being watched, of someone waiting in the shadows for the moment I make one wrong turn. And I know that if I ever take that turn again, the figure will still be there, waiting in the driveway, just as it did that night. I survived. I escaped. But the memory of that waiting, silent presence is permanent, etched into my mind with a clarity that daylight cannot erase. I had been driving for hours, the highway stretching before me like a black ribbon, interrupted only by the dim glow of passing streetlights. I was tired, my eyes heavy, my hands stiff on the wheel, but I refused to stop until I reached the next town. My phone had died somewhere back on the interstate, so I was completely reliant on my memory of the map. That was my first mistake, though I didn't realize it until much later. The road I was on curved unnaturally through thick woods. The trees leaned in close on either side, their skeletal branches scratching the windshield with each gust of wind. The air smelled faintly of damp earth and decaying leaves. I told myself it was normal, that I was simply driving through an unfamiliar stretch. But the deeper I went, the heavier the air felt, pressing against my chest like invisible hands. It was when I glimpsed the first animal that I started to feel uneasy. A deer, or maybe a coyote, darted across the road. Its eyes caught the headlights for a split second, reflecting back at me in a pale, unnatural green. I hit the brakes instinctively, my tires crunching on gravel, but the road remained clear. The animal disappeared into the shadows, leaving a silence that felt louder than the engine's hum. The GPS had long since stopped recalculating, its screen dead and useless. I was committed to the road, or so I thought, until I noticed a small sign half buried under overgrown brush, dead end. I swore I hadn't seen it before. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I had gone too far, and turning back wasn't as simple as I had hoped. The shoulder was narrow, the trees too close, the mud slick from the recent rain. I slowed the car, scanning the woods on either side. That's when I saw movement, a figure emerging from the trees. At first, I thought it was another lost traveler, but as my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I realized there were more, 3 men, maybe 4, walking deliberately toward the road. Their movements were slow, almost ceremonial, and their faces were obscured by shadow. My pulse surged, and a cold sweat broke out along my spine. I tried to tell myself it was a misunderstanding. Perhaps hunters, perhaps workers from some remote camp. But nothing about their approach was casual or hurried. They didn't scatter when they saw the headlights. They didn't wave or call out. They just moved, steadily, inexorably, closer. My rational mind floundered, grasping for explanations that didn't exist. I shifted the car into reverse, my hands trembling. But the ground was soft and uneven. Tires spun slightly on mud, leaving deep ruts. One of the men, tall, broad, impossibly still, stopped just at the edge of the clearing and raised a hand. Not to wave, not in greeting. Just raised it, vertical, rigid. My stomach dropped. The gesture was wrong, human in its mimicry but alien in execution. I pressed the accelerator again, straining to navigate the narrow, tree-lined road. The men began to spread out, flanking the car on either side. Each step they took was synchronized, quiet, deliberate. Their shadows stretched long and twisted in the headlights. I told myself I was imagining it, that the trees, the darkness, and my exhaustion were playing tricks on me. But then the scraping sound began, soft at first, like fingernails raking along bark, then louder, closer, right at the edges of my tires. Panic rose in my chest. I floored it, tires spinning on the gravel and mud, the engine screaming, but the men kept pace with me. Every turn of the wheel seemed to bring more of them out of the trees, shadows elongating unnaturally, arms stretching toward the car as if gravity itself had no hold over them. I couldn't escape. The road was a corridor, the woods pressing inward, cutting off any potential retreat. I slammed the brakes, fishtailing, my vision narrowing to a tunnel of headlights and blackness. My foot shook as I tried to plan, tried to think. I considered running the car into the trees, anything to put a barrier between myself and them. But before I could act, one of the figures, tall, impossibly thin, stepped directly into my path. The headlights glinted off its pale face. Eyes too wide. Mouth slightly open, silent and wrong. I couldn't breathe. Instinct overrode thought. I slammed the car into gear, slammed my foot down, and swerved left. Tires skidded, throwing mud onto the windshield. The figure vanished from the road in a heartbeat, but the others emerged immediately from the woods. I could see them now, several men or something like men spacing themselves perfectly, blocking any conceivable exit. One raised its hand in the same rigid, vertical gesture. My pulse was deafening in my ears. I was trapped. No turning back. No way forward. The car lurched in place, engine roaring against the sudden immobility of the world around me. Then, one of the figures tilted its head slightly, as if curious, and I saw the true horror. Their movements weren't human. The joints bent wrong, shoulders twisted just slightly off, as though each man had been constructed to imitate life but failed spectacularly. I knew, with bone-deep certainty, that they weren't hunters, weren't lost travelers. They were waiting, and now they had found me. The first hand reached the hood of my car. Cold. Bone cold, pressing down with impossible weight. I screamed and slammed the pedal to the floor again, tires spinning, mud spraying, headlights barely illuminating the advancing shapes. And in that instant, one of the figures let out a sound, a low, guttural imitation of a laugh, unhuman, vibrating deep in my chest. I turned the wheel violently and hit the ditch at the edge of the road. The car jolted, and I felt a body scrape against the side panel. My adrenaline spiked, every nerve on fire. With a combination of luck and desperation, I managed to push the car back onto the road, straightened the wheel, and floored it. The figures didn't follow immediately. I couldn't see them anymore, but I could feel the weight of their presence lingering in the dark, like smoke clinging to the edges of the world. I didn't stop until I reached the next town, where streetlights, passing cars, and ordinary human motion flooded my senses back into normality. I called the police, but when they arrived and scouted the area, there was nothing. No tracks, no figures, no signs of any men having been there. Just the woods, silent and indifferent. I have no explanation for what I saw, and I hope I never do. But every time I drive late at night, when the headlights slice through the darkness of a lonely road, I feel the memory of those impossibly slow men stalking me. And I know one thing with certainty: if I ever take that wrong turn again, I won't escape. I survived that night. Barely. And I will never forget the eyes, the hands, the deliberate patience of those men in the woods. I had been driving for hours, the monotony of the highway stretching behind me like a half-forgotten dream. My shoulders ached from gripping the wheel, and my eyes burned from the glare of oncoming headlights. I was tired, hungry, and anxious to reach my destination, a friend's cabin on the outskirts of town. My GPS had led me faithfully along the main roads, but a construction detour suddenly forced me onto a smaller, unmarked route. I hesitated at the turn but convinced myself it would just be a shortcut, a quiet back road that would save me a few miles. At first, it was ordinary enough. 2 lanes, cracked asphalt, trees pressing close on either side. The smell of damp leaves and earth filled the air, and a thin mist clung to the ground. I lowered my speed slightly. The road had the feel of one that hadn't been used in years. Nothing felt dangerous. Just old. The first odd thing I noticed was the bridge. It wasn't far down the road, a simple arching structure over a dry creek bed. The underside was dark, the concrete streaked with black stains from decades of water and neglect. As I drove closer, I realized the mist thickened beneath it, curling around the support pillars in a way that made the shadows seem alive. I hesitated at the entrance but told myself I was being silly. Just a low bridge, nothing more. Then I saw the van. White, nondescript, parked under the bridge, rear doors wide open. I slowed to a crawl, curiosity overriding fatigue. Figures were crouched near the back, straining to lift something heavy. My first thought was movers, or maybe construction workers unloading equipment. But the way they moved, their limbs stiff, awkward, almost mechanical, made my chest tighten. When they noticed me, everything froze. I stopped the car instinctively, the engine ticking in protest. The figures didn't wave, didn't smile. They just stood still, frozen mid-motion, staring at me with blank expressions. My breath caught. There were 4 of them, maybe 5, surrounding the rear of the van. The object they were unloading was covered with a tarpaulin, large enough to be a mattress or a body. My stomach knotted. I told myself it was probably a large piece of furniture, maybe a coffin-shaped crate for some harmless reason. Rational explanations. I even forced a small, nervous laugh, trying to dispel the unease that had settled in my chest. The mist swirled around the pillars, thickening the shadows, and the silence under the bridge pressed in on me, as though the world outside had ceased to exist. But then I noticed the smell. A faint, metallic tang that clung to the air, mixing with the damp odor of the creek bed. My stomach lurched. I forced my eyes away from the tarp, back to the figures. They hadn't moved, not a muscle. And yet there was an intensity in their gaze that went beyond human recognition, a collective awareness that made my skin crawl. I tried to put the car in reverse. Tires spun slightly on the gravel, but the vehicle moved. Slowly. That was enough for the figures to react. One of them, tall, gaunt, with dark shadows under the eyes, tilted its head slightly, like an animal assessing prey. The others mirrored it perfectly, synchronized in a way that felt unnatural. I realized, in a cold nod of certainty, that they weren't just workers or movers. They were waiting. Panic began to claw at me. My rational mind shouted, "Just drive, just leave." I did, accelerating too quickly, tires screeching against the uneven surface. The van door slammed open with a hollow thunk, though I never saw it move. A sudden, scraping sound followed me as I passed the bridge, like metal dragging against stone, echoing off the concrete pillars. I dared not look in the rearview mirror. My hands shook violently on the wheel. I couldn't explain the figure of the one closest to the van suddenly stepping slightly into the road, just enough to feel its presence through the headlights, its elongated shadow stretching toward my tires. My stomach rolled. The world felt smaller, tighter, as if the bridge itself had closed in around me. I risked a glance behind me. Nothing. Just the empty road, gray mist curling in the beams of my headlights. Relief washed over me briefly, only to be replaced by the image burned into my mind, the tarp. Its edges were damp, clinging to whatever it concealed, and I knew with unshakable certainty that what they had been moving wasn't furniture. My pulse raced as I pushed forward, the mist thinning only slightly as the bridge receded behind me. The ordinary world returned, streetlights flickering on, the hum of distant traffic, the familiar rumble of tires on asphalt. I pulled into the first open gas station I saw, doors locked, engine running, body trembling. I stared back down the road, half expecting to see them emerge from the shadows, vanishing under the bridge, waiting for another victim. Hours later, the police scouted the area with me. They found the van, yes, parked under the bridge. Empty. No tarpaulin, no figures, nothing except tire tracks in the mud. They shrugged and suggested I was tired, my imagination playing tricks on me. Rational explanations. But I know better. I've never returned to that road. I've learned to keep the lights on in my car at night, to avoid any street that seems too quiet, to never trust mist curling beneath a bridge. And I know this, whatever I saw under that bridge that night is still there. Waiting. Watching. Moving with deliberate patience, carrying whatever it is it wants, ready for the next person who dares take the wrong turn. I survived. I escaped. But the memory of the van, the tarp, and those frozen figures is etched into my mind. And I know that if I ever stray onto that road again, there will be no escape. I had been driving for hours, the road stretching before me like a ribbon of black silk under the weak glow of my headlights. My commute to my sister's cabin had started as an ordinary evening drive, but a detour sent me down a smaller, less traveled road. At first, I didn't mind. The asphalt was narrow, flanked by trees, and the occasional farmhouse passed in the periphery, lights glowing faintly through the dusk. The air was crisp, the smell of damp leaves and earth drifting in through the cracked window. Ordinary enough. But the road grew lonelier. Houses became sparse, then non-existent. The pavement cracked, gravel intruding along the edges, and the trees pressed closer, their shadows clawing at the hood of my car. I told myself I was imagining things, that I'd just taken a road less maintained. Rational thoughts helped only so much. I glanced at my fuel gauge. Plenty left, though the area felt unwelcoming enough that I resolved to keep moving. That's when it happened. A faint sputtering from the engine. I frowned and pressed the accelerator. The sputtering worsened. My heart began to race. I attempted to restart the car. Nothing. The engine died with a final, wheezing cough. Silence fell around me, absolute and heavy. No crickets, no rustling leaves, no distant car horns. Only the faint hum of static from the dead radio. I tried the lights. Dim, flickering. The street was empty, a corridor of blackness stretching in either direction, the trees pressing in like walls. I told myself I could walk to the next intersection or flag down a passing vehicle. Surely, someone would appear soon. Rational. Safe. Minutes passed. The wind rustled the branches, scratching faintly against the windshield. I checked the rearview mirror and froze. Headlights, faint but steady, emerged far behind me. I exhaled in relief. Someone was coming. Rescue. A neighbor? A passing car? But as the headlights approached, my relief faltered. They didn't pass. Not even slightly. They maintained distance, following. Slow, deliberate, patient. I sat frozen in the driver's seat, hands gripping the wheel, trying to convince myself it was coincidence, another driver delayed by something ahead. I started the car again, engine coughing, sputtering, then roaring weakly to life. I reversed a bit, hoping to move closer to the main road, but the headlights mirrored my every motion, stopping when I stopped, accelerating when I did. My stomach churned. Rationality slipped. Maybe a nervous driver? A kid playing a prank? I tried to laugh quietly to myself, but the sound was hollow. Every instinct told me to drive forward, to flee, yet the road ahead twisted unnaturally, long shadows stretching like fingers across the cracked asphalt. Trees leaned in closer, their branches tangling above the road in dark, arching patterns. I risked glancing at the lights behind me. Nothing else, no shape discernible, just a bright glare through the gloom. No indicator, no horn, no engine hum beyond the faint flicker of distant headlights. But I could feel it, someone there. Something there. Waiting, observing. My pulse hammering, I tried to rationalize. Exhaustion, paranoia, reflection of my headlights on the mist that had begun to settle. Rational. Safe. Minutes stretched. I pressed the gas, tires crunching over gravel patches, desperate to reach the next intersection. Yet the lights stayed behind me, unrelenting. The quiet was suffocating. My breath came fast, uneven. I dared to look around, to scan the woods on either side. Shadows moved, but it was impossible to tell if they were branches swaying in the wind or figures slipping silently between the trees. I tried a maneuver. I turned sharply onto a narrower path, hoping to confuse whoever or whatever was behind me. The headlights followed without hesitation, maintaining the same perfect distance. My chest tightened, hands trembling. Rational thought was impossible. I realized with growing dread that I was being tracked. Studied. Waited for. The first sound of something solid hitting the undercarriage made me scream. Gravel shifted under the tires. My stomach dropped. The lights behind me remained steady, now brighter, closer, but still following. I floored it, pushing the car to its limits, tires screeching, heart pounding, fog swirling around me in sheets. And then, movement. Shadows beyond the headlights, just at the edge of vision. Something tall, impossibly still, slipping between the trees, keeping pace with the vehicle without any sound of footfalls. I tried to ignore it, focused on escape. Rationally, I told myself I was imagining figures in the fog. It's the headlights reflecting off branches. Rational. Safe. But then, a faint sound, metal scraping lightly on asphalt, echoed from behind. I froze, gripping the wheel. The scraping persisted, moving perfectly in sync with the car. My pulse raced. Every rational explanation collapsed under the weight of certainty. I was being followed. Not randomly. Not accidentally. Deliberately. I reached the main road at last, the fog thinning, asphalt smooth, lights from distant towns glimmering. I drove through it like a man possessed, gasping, tears stinging my eyes, checking every mirror, expecting them to appear on the road behind me. When I dared to glance, the headlights were gone. Vanished. Just a normal night now, ordinary streetlights and empty lanes. I called the police, reported the incident. No cars matching my description. No signs of pursuit. The road was empty, as though it had never existed. I told myself exhaustion and fear had warped perception. Rational. Safe. But I know better. That night, I felt a presence, patient and intelligent, following with deliberate precision. I survived. I escaped. But every time I drive alone after dark, I feel it, the knowledge that somewhere, in the shadows, headlights could appear again, keeping pace, waiting for the wrong turn. I will never take that detour again. I had been driving for hours, following the fading light westward, hoping to reach my aunt's house before night fully claimed the countryside. The highway had been simple, familiar, and uneventful, but a detour, an orange flash of cones and road closed signs forced me onto smaller, winding roads that I didn't recognize. At first, it felt quaint, even scenic, narrow asphalt bordered by fields and low hills, the smell of freshly plowed soil in the air. Ordinary enough, or so I told myself. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, shadows lengthened unnaturally across the road. The houses became sparse, and the occasional farmhouse appeared like islands in a sea of darkness. I passed one with its porch light flickering weakly, but nobody was visible outside. The further I drove, the quieter it became. No radio, no rustling of animals, nothing beyond the low hum of my tires on the asphalt. A sense of unease began to creep up my spine, subtle at first, like the brush of a spider against bare skin. The GPS had stopped recalculating. I glanced down. No signal blinked in bold letters. I muttered to myself. I knew roughly which direction I needed to go, but the unfamiliar roads were starting to twist in ways that made my stomach knot. The next bend brought me to a narrow, unlit lane flanked by overgrown hedges. My headlights barely penetrated the darkness. I pressed on, but the trees seemed to lean closer, branches tapping against the roof with ghostly fingers. After another 10 minutes, I realized I had gone too far. There were no street signs, no familiar landmarks, and a creeping fog had begun to settle over the fields. I pulled over at the side of the road, hoping to regroup and figure out the best way forward. That's when I noticed the lights of a small farmhouse in the distance. Relief flooded through me. Maybe someone could help, give me directions back to the main road. I drove slowly up the driveway and parked near the weathered porch, the gravel crunching sharply beneath the tires. I cut the engine and listened. No wind, no animals, just a suffocating silence. I told myself it was fine, rational. The man who lived here would see me and offer directions, nothing more. I got out, feeling the chill of early evening wrap around me. "Excuse me?" I called softly, trying not to startle anyone. There was a pause, then movement. A man stepped out from the side of the house, tall, thin, with pale skin and a worn coat. His face was partially obscured by shadow, but I could see his eyes, dark, cold, fixed on me with an intensity that made my chest tighten. "Hi," I said, forcing a smile, hoping to diffuse my sudden tension. "I'm lost. Could you point me back to Route 18? He didn't respond immediately. Just stepped closer, slowly, methodically. My eyes flicked toward the car. He was moving toward the passenger side, not the front door. A cold lump formed in my stomach. Sir?" I asked, voice catching. He stopped, then bent slightly, his hands brushing the handle of the passenger door. My breath hitched. I stumbled back. "Please don't," I began. He froze as if considering me, then tried the handle again. Something primal in me screamed to run, but I was on uneven ground, gravel shifting beneath my feet. Rational explanations fled. Maybe he was confused, maybe he thought someone else was in the car, maybe he was just odd. But the way his eyes followed me, deliberate and unblinking, told me that rational had no place here. I ran back to the driver's side, fumbling with the keys. My hands shook violently. "Stay away!" I shouted, voice cracking. He didn't respond, didn't flinch, just tilted his head, slowly, the way predators study prey. The air seemed to thicken. My chest ached as adrenaline clawed through me, sharp and insistent. I managed to get the door unlocked and dove in, slamming it shut just as his hand rattled against the window. Heart hammering, I started the car and slammed it into reverse, tires spinning on loose gravel. He didn't retreat. He walked toward the rear of the car with the same unnatural calm, keeping pace with me as I tried to gain momentum. I floored the accelerator, the engine screaming, tires skidding as I jerked the wheel onto the main road. The man didn't chase in the conventional sense, he didn't run, but his movements were impossibly precise, keeping him aligned with the car in the rearview mirror. My pulse raced, my vision blurred. Rational explanations dissolved completely. This was no confused neighbor, no prankster, no human error. The road stretched on endlessly, straight and narrow, lined with empty fields. I risked a glance behind me. He was gone. For a moment, relief surged through me. But then I saw it, a shadow shifting just at the edge of my headlights, between the trees, elongated, moving with impossible coordination. My stomach turned. He hadn't left. He had been watching, waiting, maintaining distance until he could act. I didn't dare stop again. Not for anything. Not for intersections, not for turns, not for lights in the distance. I drove as if the night itself were pursuing me. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, time lost all meaning. Finally, I recognized a familiar turn leading toward the town I had aimed for. I didn't slow until I reached the bright glow of streetlights, pavement smooth and ordinary beneath my tires. I stopped at a gas station, doors locked, shaking violently. People walked past, oblivious. I couldn't explain what had happened, and I knew I never would. The man at the farmhouse was no ordinary person. Rational thought had nothing to offer against what I had encountered that night. I survived. I escaped. But I will never take that road again. Every time I drive alone after dark, I remember his eyes, fixed and unblinking, and the deliberate way he tried to open my passenger door. I know that if I had hesitated for even a moment longer, I wouldn't be writing this. And I know, somewhere, he waits. I had been driving for hours, the highway stretching before me in long, unbroken lines of asphalt and dim streetlights. My plan had been simple: reach my cousin's cabin before dark and settle in for a quiet weekend away from the city. The drive was uneventful at first, familiar stretches of road punctuated by occasional trucks and blinking traffic lights. But a detour sign forced me off the main highway, a minor inconvenience I didn't think twice about. At first, the road seemed ordinary. Potholes patched unevenly, cones lining one side, the faint scent of fresh asphalt lingering in the air. The sun had dipped behind the horizon, leaving the sky a bruised purple, and the trees lining the road were just dark shapes against the twilight. I slowed slightly, the tires crunching over gravel patches. Nothing unusual, just a quiet stretch of construction detour. Then I noticed the first anomaly. Ahead, the orange glow of cones and lights formed a semicircle, marking a work area that seemed wider than necessary. A pair of men in neon vests were standing on the shoulder, talking. One waved lazily as I drove past, and I nodded in return. But the movement didn't feel natural. The wave lasted too long, and the men didn't look at each other afterward, they just stared after me as I passed. I shook my head, chiding myself for overthinking. A bend in the road led me deeper into the site. The familiar sounds of construction, hammers, drills, the rumble of machinery had faded, replaced by an eerie silence. I noticed that the orange fencing ahead wasn't continuous. There were gaps, allowing cars to pass where none should. I shrugged and continued, assuming it was a shortcut through an incomplete section. The rational part of my mind kept insisting, it's just construction. Nothing more. But then I realized something was wrong. The workers weren't working. I passed a group leaning against a partially erected frame, tool belts hanging loosely, drills and hammers abandoned on the ground. They watched me. And then one of them dropped his wrench, deliberately, letting it clatter to the asphalt. The sound echoed, sharp and deliberate, and the other men froze. All eyes were on me. I slowed instinctively. My pulse quickened. Surely, they were just signaling me to stop, or maybe they didn't expect a car here. Rational explanations, I told myself. But the air felt heavier, the shadows longer, stretching toward the car like dark, reaching fingers. One of them stepped closer to the road, then another, then the rest. They moved with a deliberation that made my stomach twist. Not a run, not a casual approach like predators encircling prey, patient and deliberate. I pressed my foot to the accelerator, but it was a short, narrow stretch. There was no way around them. They flanked the car as I crawled forward, forming a semicircle that kept expanding, their faces blank and pale under the orange glow of the safety lights. Rational thought fled. I told myself it was a prank, someone's idea of a joke, but the way they moved in perfect synchronization, the way the silence wrapped around me like a living thing, crushed that theory. Every muscle in my body screamed to escape, yet the road ahead was just more of them, another circle closing in. I tried rolling down the window to speak. "Excuse me," I shouted. "I don't belong here. I'll leave." My voice sounded small against the oppressive stillness. One of them lifted a hand, not a wave, not to signal, but slowly, in a vertical line, as if measuring me, testing me. My chest tightened. Rational thought evaporated entirely. I had made a wrong turn, and I was trapped. I reversed slightly, tires spinning on gravel, but the semicircle shifted with me, maintaining a deliberate distance, leaving no path clear. The tools, drills, hammers, wrenches lay abandoned on the ground, like silent threats. The air smelled faintly of oil and dirt, but underlying it was something sharper, iron-like, that made my stomach churn. Desperation clawed at me. I considered jumping the curb, breaking through a fence, anything. But they anticipated every movement. I floored the accelerator and lunged forward, tires screeching, mud spraying. A hammer clattered against the side of the car as someone swung it, deliberately missing, but close enough to make my heart leap into my throat. I kept driving, weaving through the cones, dodging shadows that weren't shadows at all but human forms, moving faster than seemed possible, gliding in perfect synchrony. My knuckles were raw from gripping the wheel, my breathing ragged. The stretch of road finally opened into a larger intersection, streetlights spilling ordinary yellow over asphalt. The workers didn't follow. They didn't move from the site. They just stood there, tools abandoned, watching as I sped away, lights trembling, heart pounding. I didn't slow until I reached the main highway, passing other cars, normal drivers, normal life. My hands were shaking, sweat slick, stomach twisting. I tried to tell myself it had been a dream, exhaustion, paranoia, but the scrape of a hammer against my car's fender, the deliberate, measuring gaze, was etched in my mind. I called the police. They investigated the construction site the next morning. No tools on the ground, no signs of anyone having been there. Just the half-finished road, empty and silent under the sun. Rational explanation, none. I survived that night. I escaped. But every time I drive past a construction zone, even the quietest, most ordinary one, I see them in my mind, the way they dropped their tools, the circle they formed, and the deliberate, patient way they measured me. And I know, if I had stayed even a moment longer, even a single misstep, I wouldn't be writing this. Somewhere, they wait. And next time, they won't let me leave. I had been driving for hours, the road stretching before me like a black ribbon under the dim glow of my headlights. My plan had been simple: reach my friend's cabin before nightfall, a quiet weekend away from the city. The main highways had been straightforward, familiar stretches of asphalt punctuated by occasional trucks and blinking streetlights. But somewhere along the way, a detour forced me off the main road, down a side street I hadn't intended to take. I had shrugged it off at first. Shortcuts happen, and I was in no rush. At first, the road seemed ordinary. 2 narrow lanes, cracked pavement, occasional reflective markers catching my headlights. The smell of wet asphalt and soil filled the air, crisp with the first chill of evening. Houses dotted the road sparsely, each dark and quiet. I slowed slightly as I passed, noting with mild unease that none of the lights were on, not a single TV glow or porch lamp to break the darkness. Rational thoughts reassured me. Maybe they were out, maybe the power was off. Nothing unusual, yet a strange tightness settled in my chest. The GPS had long since lost signal. No service blinked mockingly on my phone. I muttered, gripping the wheel a little tighter. I should have turned back, I realized, but I was already too far down the side road, too committed to hesitate. A bend in the road appeared ahead, a small dirt lane leading off to the right. I figured it would let me make a quick turnaround and get back on track. I slowed, signaling, and pulled onto the narrow side road. Gravel crunched beneath the tires, scattering into the dark edges of the forest that pressed close on either side. My headlights barely penetrated the gloom. It was quiet, too quiet. I told myself the silence was normal. No cars, no people, it was a country road. Rational. Safe. I put the car in reverse and began backing up slowly, eyes scanning for anything that might be lurking in the darkness. That's when I noticed headlights far behind, faint but steadily growing brighter. Another vehicle, approaching, though I assumed it would pass. But it didn't. It stayed behind me, maintaining a steady distance. Rational thoughts tried to assert themselves, probably another lost driver, cautious in the dark. But the impossibility of its timing, the precision of its following, set my nerves on edge. As I reversed farther, the road narrowing beneath trees that seemed to lean closer with every passing second, the headlights followed without deviation. My pulse jumped. I tried to reason. Perhaps the driver was distracted, following too closely. Maybe it would pass. But my stomach sank when I noticed the car wasn't slowing or attempting to overtake me. It matched every movement, every slight swerve, as if it knew exactly where I would go next. A hollow dread crept over me. I considered throwing the car into drive and accelerating back toward the main road, but the side lane curved sharply ahead, gravel and mud threatening to spin the tires. I was cornered. My rational brain insisted, it's just coincidence, just a cautious driver. But instinct screamed otherwise. Something about those headlights was deliberate. Predatory. I kept reversing, praying for an exit. The lane ended abruptly at a tree line, rough dirt giving way to dense undergrowth. I hit the brakes, heart hammering, breath shallow. The car behind me didn't slow. Its headlights glowed, brighter now, washing the trees in a harsh, unnatural light. I could feel it watching, though I didn't dare look directly at the vehicle, fearful of what I might see in the reflection of my rearview mirror. Thin movement. Shadows shifted beyond the beams, figures stepping out from between the trees. At first I thought I was imagining them, a trick of the dim light and my frayed nerves. But the shapes became clearer, tall, thin, moving slowly and deliberately, forming a semicircle behind the car. My pulse leapt into my throat. Rational explanations collapsed entirely. This was no accident, no lost driver, no innocent coincidence. I slammed the car into drive, tires spinning on loose gravel, mud spraying as I lunged forward, desperate to escape. The figures adjusted effortlessly, keeping pace, maintaining the semicircle with unnatural precision. My stomach nodded. Rationality had fled. There was no explanation for their movement, the way they seemed to anticipate every motion, every turn of the wheel. I risked a glance in the rearview mirror. One of them, a tall figure, gaunt, unblinking, stood at the edge of the beam of my headlights, head tilted slightly as if studying me. The others loitered behind, indistinct but synchronized in posture and timing. The lights behind me were still there, now closer, but I couldn't tell if they were part of the car or separate. My mind screamed for action, yet I felt paralyzed, trapped between the creeping inevitability ahead and the encroaching darkness behind. Finally, the side lane widened and met a main road. I swerved onto it with everything I had, tires skidding, engine screaming. The figures didn't follow onto the asphalt. They stayed at the edge, just beyond the reach of my headlights, standing perfectly still. The other car, the one that had blocked me, vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving only the hum of the engine and my own ragged breathing. I didn't slow until I reached the next town, streetlights spilling over asphalt, ordinary cars moving at normal speeds. I called the police, reported the incident, but there were no vehicles matching my description. No reports of anyone else being there. Rational explanations, none. I survived. I escaped. But every time I drive down a dark, empty lane, I remember those headlights, fixed and unblinking, following in perfect synchronization, and I know the truth. If I had paused even a moment longer on that side road, if I had hesitated, they would have closed in. There is no randomness in that darkness, only patience and inevitability. And I know, somewhere, they are waiting for the next wrong turn. I had been driving for hours, the highway stretching before me like a ribbon of black asphalt, interrupted only by the dull glow of my headlights. The trip was supposed to be ordinary, visit a friend's cabin out in the country, a quiet escape from the city. The roads had been familiar at first, the hum of tires on asphalt coming, the occasional passing car nothing more than a momentary distraction. But a construction detour forced me onto a smaller, curving road I didn't recognize. I hadn't minded at first. Detours happen, and I told myself I was just taking a minor scenic route. At first, the road seemed normal. Narrow, 2 lanes, the asphalt cracked and uneven in places, bordered by dark woods on either side. I could smell damp soil and the faint, earthy scent of pine. A few houses passed by, all dark, no signs of life. I slowed slightly as I drove, a mild unease in my chest. Empty windows stared back at me. Rational explanations crowded my mind. The residents were asleep, or maybe the houses were abandoned. Nothing to worry about. The GPS signal had long since vanished, no service blinking on my phone as though mocking me. I muttered, gripping the wheel a little tighter. I should have turned back then, but I didn't. The road twisted unexpectedly, curves I hadn't anticipated, each one revealing only more darkness beyond the reach of my headlights. I tried to focus on the ordinary, the hum of the engine, the gentle sway of the car over uneven pavement. Rational thoughts. Safe thoughts. Then I saw the figure. At first, it was just a silhouette, standing still in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes instinctively, the tires crunching on gravel, my heart jumping into my throat. My headlights illuminated the person fully, tall, thin, arms hanging loosely at their sides. They didn't move, didn't flinch as I stopped, just stared. Rationally, I told myself it was a hitchhiker, maybe someone lost, someone who needed help. But the way the shadows shifted around them made my stomach turn. And then I noticed the others. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks, but there were figures at the edges of the road, emerging from the trees on both sides. Pale faces, indistinct in the darkness, but their eyes, glinting in the faint light, locked on me. My breath hitched. My pulse thundered. I told myself to rationalize it. Maybe deer? Maybe signs reflecting? Anything. But my gut screamed, these were people. Watching. Waiting. I tried to back up slowly, but the road was narrow, lined with trees that leaned toward me like towering, skeletal spectators. I risked a glance at the rearview mirror. My heart froze. More figures appeared behind me, moving with a deliberate, patient pace that made no sound. Tires crunched on gravel, but nothing else, no footsteps, no rustle of leaves. They were everywhere, perfectly coordinated. I slammed the car into drive, tires squealing, my hands trembling violently. I swerved slightly to the right, hoping to skirt the edge of the road, but the figures anticipated me. One stepped out in front, blocking me entirely. Others appeared on the sides, flanking me, shadows stretching unnaturally in the headlights. Rationality was gone. I couldn't explain their synchronization, the way they moved without sound, as if gravity itself bent around them. I tried yelling. "Stay back. I'm leaving." My voice cracked in the cold night air, swallowed almost immediately by silence. One of them tilted its head slightly, just enough to let me see its face clearly. Features wrong, elongated, eyes too wide, too black, unblinking. The rational part of my brain screamed that I had to escape, but my body froze, my hands gripping the wheel as though the car itself might protect me. I floored it, tires skidding, the car lunging forward. Gravel sprayed, trees whipping past, headlights cutting a tunnel of light through the oppressive dark. The figures kept pace, flanking the car effortlessly, moving with a precision no human could maintain. My stomach churned. I realized with a bone-deep certainty that if I stopped or slowed, they would be upon me immediately. The road twisted sharply ahead. I risked a glance behind me in the mirror. The figures were still there, circling, patient, unhurried, yet impossibly fast. I veered onto a slightly wider stretch, hoping to escape their formation, but the road narrowed again. A low moan or whisper reached my ears, soft, almost indistinguishable from the wind. I couldn't tell if it came from them or from my own mind. Panic clawed at me. I considered turning into the woods, but the trees were dense, and the figures anticipated every movement. Rational thought had completely collapsed. I was trapped in a corridor of darkness, surrounded by living shadows that defied explanation. And then, finally, the main road appeared. Streetlights spilled over asphalt, normalcy rushing in with ordinary brightness. I didn't slow. Tires squealed as I slammed onto the wider road, adrenaline burning through my body. I risked a glance back. The figures had stopped at the edge of the forest, pale and still, watching, patient. The person who had been in the middle of the road remained there, alone now, as though marking territory, waiting for the next car that strayed too far. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest gas station, doors locked, shaking violently, tears streaming. Rational explanations, none satisfied me. Police found nothing. No footprints, no figures, no evidence of anyone being there. The road was empty, quiet, ordinary under the daylight. I survived. I escaped. But every night, whenever I drive alone on dark roads, I see them in my mind, the central figure, the shadowy flanks, circling, patient, unblinking. And I know the truth. They wait for mistakes, for wrong turns, for anyone who dares drive too far into the darkness. I will never take that road again. And I know, if I ever did, I wouldn't survive a second encounter. I had been driving for hours, my hands tight on the steering wheel, the highway stretching out in dull, unbroken lines beneath my headlights. I wasn't lost, at least, not at first. The trip was simple: visit my cousin's cabin in the country, a quiet weekend to get away from the city. Traffic had been light, the hum of tires on asphalt soothing, the occasional truck or car nothing more than a brief distraction. But a detour forced me off the main road, down a narrow, twisting lane I didn't recognize. I told myself it would save time, a shortcut. At first, it seemed normal. Cracked asphalt, fading lane lines, fields on either side. A few houses appeared, dark, their windows black voids. I slowed slightly, noting the silence, the way the occasional tree leaned toward the road like it wanted to touch the car. Rational explanations. The houses were empty, no one was home, nothing to worry about. The GPS signal was gone, dead, blinking no service. I muttered under my breath. Not a problem, I thought. I knew roughly which direction I needed to go. But as I drove, a strange unease began creeping up my spine. The shadows seemed longer, the bends sharper, the trees pressing in closer. Every rational thought, shortcut, efficiency, ordinary country road, faded into a dull roar of anxiety in my chest. Then I noticed the car. At first, it was just a reflection in my rearview mirror, headlights glinting faintly on the cracked asphalt behind me. I exhaled. Probably just another driver. I focused on my lane, rationalizing, it will pass soon. But it didn't. Every time I glanced back, it was there, the same make, the same color, perfectly mirroring my path. I tried not to think about it. Another rational explanation, coincidence, maybe someone else heading to the same area. Nothing more. I took the first turn I could, hoping to confirm it was another car and not some optical illusion. My heart beat faster when the car followed, effortlessly maintaining the same distance. My stomach churned. I told myself not to panic, that paranoia was a natural response after hours of driving through unfamiliar terrain. Rational. Safe. But the certainty that I was being watched gnawed at me, cold and insistent. The road narrowed, flanked by trees pressing close to the edge. Gravel cracked under my tires as I tried small course adjustments, slight turns, braking, accelerating, but every motion was mirrored. The car behind me didn't hesitate, didn't swerve, didn't deviate. My pulse thundered. Rationality began to slip. No human driver could mimic another car with that precision, that anticipation. I considered pulling into a driveway, somewhere I could confront the driver, demand an explanation. But each time a driveway appeared, it was empty, the trees swallowing any potential refuge. The headlights followed. Always the same distance, always perfectly aligned, patient. My rational mind screamed, maybe it's someone lost. Maybe it's coincidence. Maybe. A bend in the road revealed a small bridge spanning a creek. I slowed, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles whitened. Gravel scraped under the tires as the reflection of the car in my mirror shimmered, seeming to creep closer. I told myself to breathe, to remember rational explanations, tiredness, shadows, optical illusions. But the metallic tang of fear filled my mouth, my chest tightening with each tick of the clock in my dashboard. I risked a glance in the mirror. One of the headlights glinted in a way that made the shape of the car almost unnatural. Its outline seemed too perfect, too still, and yet it moved, always moving. A flash of movement in the shadows beyond the car, human? Something else? My stomach rolled. Rational thought offered nothing. I realized I had made a wrong turn. A dangerous wrong turn, and I was trapped in a corridor of darkness with something deliberately following me. Panic rose. I floored the accelerator, tires squealing over cracked asphalt, trying to reach the main road. The lane widened slightly, giving me hope. I risked a glance behind. The car was closer now, closer than it should have been if it were obeying the normal laws of distance. My chest burned, my breath came in short, jagged gasps. Rational explanations dissolved completely. There was nothing ordinary about this. Nothing human. I tried a maneuver, sharp right, then left, hoping to lose it. The headlights mirrored every move with terrifying precision. My pulse hit my throat, sweat slick on my palms, teeth clenched. I screamed, loud enough that my voice echoed back from the trees, but it didn't matter. The car behind me was patient. It waited for mistakes, for hesitation. It would not be rushed. Hours or minutes, I couldn't tell, passed in a blur of asphalt, shadows, and mirrored headlights. Trees leaned in, branches clawing at the car, the occasional flash of gravel spitting beneath the tires. Then, finally, the lane widened into a main road. Streetlights glowed, ordinary cars moved at normal speed. I didn't slow until I reached the first gas station, doors locked, engine running, hands trembling violently. I called the police, reported the incident. No vehicle matched my description. No reports of anyone following. The road was empty, normal under daylight, as if the darkness had swallowed any evidence of what had been there. Rationality offered no comfort. I survived. I escaped. But every time I drive alone on a country road, every time headlights appear behind me, I feel it, patient, precise, unblinking, waiting for the wrong turn. I know that if I ever take that road again, I won't survive the next encounter. I had been driving for hours, the road stretching endlessly ahead, bathed in the dim glow of my headlights. My plan had been simple: reach my cousin's cabin before dark and settle in for a quiet weekend away from the city. The highway had been straightforward, familiar stretches of asphalt, the hum of tires against the pavement coming, broken occasionally by a passing truck or the distant glow of another car. Then came the detour. A bright orange sign, road closed ahead, forced me onto a side street I didn't recognize. I didn't mind at first, shortcuts were common in the country, and I told myself I was saving time. The road was narrow, cracked, bordered by dense trees that leaned toward the asphalt. Shadows stretched across the lane, long and dark, and I could feel the temperature drop as the sun disappeared entirely behind the horizon. I told myself it was just evening chill. Rational. Safe. The GPS signal had vanished, leaving me with nothing but the map in my mind. I muttered to myself, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. The first mile was ordinary enough: a few dilapidated houses, dark windows, no lights. A quiet neighborhood, empty streets. Nothing unusual, nothing to worry about. But as I drove further, unease began to creep in. The road twisted unnaturally, turning back on itself at impossible angles, and the woods pressed closer, shadows clawing across the hood. I chalked it up to fatigue, but the feeling in my gut told me something was off. When the lane forked, I chose the right-hand path, thinking it might connect back to a main road. A few minutes in, the asphalt ended, replaced by rough dirt. I slowed, scanning the darkness, the beam of my headlights cutting a weak swath through the trees. That's when I saw it, the edge of a field, illuminated just enough for my eyes to adjust. At first, I thought it was a small parking lot, maybe a rural event or a farm operation. But as I approached, the hairs on my arms stood on end. The field was full of cars. Hundreds of them, lined up in neat rows, engines running. Exhaust plumes rose into the cold night air, curling lazily in the headlights. Headlights glowed eerily back at me, and the faint hum of idling engines filled the air. My pulse quickened. The closest vehicles were just 10 feet away, but there were no drivers inside. No one. Just metal shells vibrating softly with life. I exhaled, telling myself it had to be rational. Maybe someone left the cars running to warm them for a party, a gathering, or a long-haul farm shift. Maybe people had gone inside a building I couldn't see yet. Rational. Safe. I started to back up, intending to leave, but the field stretched in every direction. The dirt road I had used to enter had disappeared into tall grass, and I realized, with a sinking feeling, that there was no clear path out. I rolled the window down and listened. The hum of the engines was constant, almost hypnotic, punctuated by occasional creaks of metal settling. No footsteps, no voices, nothing alive. The absence of life was worse than any threat I could imagine. My rational mind fought it. Maybe everyone had gone to a cabin, a barn, somewhere out of sight. But the thought offered no comfort. It only made the emptiness more pronounced. I tried the car doors. Locked. Engine running, tires gripping the dirt. I glanced at the mirrors, half expecting to see someone hiding among the trees. Nothing moved. Just more cars, engines alive, exhaust curling in the cold night. My chest tightened. I tried to start the car in reverse, but the vehicle felt sluggish, as if the earth itself resisted me. Panic surged. Rationality slipped. I was trapped. A sudden sound made me freeze. A single door somewhere in the middle of the field creaked open. I turned, heart hammering. No one was visible, but the hum of engines seemed louder, more insistent. Then, movement. Shadows shifting behind the cars. At first I thought it was my imagination, the trees, the reflection of headlights. But the shapes solidified, figures moving between the vehicles, slow, deliberate, synchronized, but never fully visible. I slammed my foot on the accelerator. Tires kicked up dirt and gravel, the engine screaming in protest. My headlights caught glimpses of the figures, tall, thin, elongated, stepping silently between the rows of idling cars. Rational thought screamed at me, maybe mannequins, maybe scarecrows, but the way they adjusted their movements to the car, keeping pace without sound, made my stomach churn. Nothing human moved like that. I swerved, tires skidding, trying to find a gap in the endless rows. Every turn revealed more cars, more engines alive, more shadows gliding silently between them. The field seemed to stretch forever, swallowing any escape route. Rationality had abandoned me. I realized I had driven into something predatory, something ancient and patient, waiting for the wrong person to wander into its domain. Exhausted and terrified, I risked a glance behind me. The figures were now closer, slipping between the cars with impossible precision. I floored the accelerator, weaving wildly, tires throwing dirt into the cold night. Then, finally, the edge of the field appeared. A faint outline of trees, beyond them the curve of a road I recognized from earlier. I didn't dare slow. I emerged onto the asphalt, gasping, hands slick with sweat, heart hammering. The field behind me was quiet now, empty, nothing moving. I didn't stop until I reached the next town, the warm glow of streetlights bathing the ordinary streets in relief. Rational explanations offered nothing. Police found no evidence. The field, the cars, the idling engines, none existed during daylight. I survived. I escaped. But I know the truth. I know what waits in fields like that, ready to trap anyone who takes a wrong turn. I will never drive that road again. And every time I pass a rural side street, I see it in my mind, hundreds of cars, engines running, and the patient, synchronized shadows that will never leave you alone. If you enter their domain, you will not leave. I had been driving for hours, the highway stretching before me in long, straight lines, the headlights of passing cars briefly illuminating the dark countryside. My plan was simple: reach my friend's cabin before nightfall and spend a quiet weekend away from the city. The drive had been ordinary at first, familiar roads and traffic lights, the hum of tires on asphalt comforting. I liked the solitude, it made the miles feel easier. Then came the detour. Bright orange signs instructed me to leave the main road, steering me down a narrow side street I hadn't intended to take. I hadn't minded at first. Shortcuts were common in rural areas, and I thought I was saving time. The road was cracked and uneven, bordered by dense trees that seemed to lean toward the asphalt. Shadows stretched across the lane, long and dark, curling beneath the occasional streetlight that flickered weakly. I told myself it was just the evening settling in. Rational, safe, ordinary. After a few minutes, the road curved sharply, leaving no chance to turn around immediately. A sinking feeling took hold, subtle at first, like the quiet chill of the night brushing my neck. The GPS had long since lost signal, leaving me dependent on memory and instinct. I tried to focus on mundane things, the purr of the engine, the slight creak of the suspension, the scent of wet asphalt in the cool air. Nothing seemed wrong, yet the unease persisted. When I finally spotted a driveway, wide enough for a car to swing around, relief washed over me. I slowed, signaling my intent, and turned onto the gravel, the tires crunching loudly in the still night. The trees seemed to close behind me, blocking the road, and I let out a breath. I would just turn around and get back on track. Simple. Safe. Ordinary. Then I noticed the house. At first, it appeared empty, the silhouette of a garage and a faintly illuminated porch. I assumed someone lived here, but the lot was otherwise quiet. I put the car in reverse and began to maneuver slowly. The gravel shifted beneath my tires with a satisfying crunch. I focused on my mirrors, checking for clearance, trying to calm the nagging feeling that had been creeping up my spine since the detour. And then the garage door moved. Slowly, deliberately, it rolled upward, the mechanical groan of the opener cutting through the silence like a knife. My heart stuttered. Rational thoughts tried to assert themselves. Maybe the homeowner had an automatic door. Maybe they just finished working in the garage. I told myself that people do things at night. It was ordinary. Safe. Then I saw him. A figure stepped out, emerging from the dim interior, holding something in his hand. I couldn't tell what it was at first. The distance and the shadows masked its shape. My mind raced. Maybe a tool, maybe a flashlight. Rationally, I tried to convince myself nothing was wrong. But the way he stood, still, deliberate, unmoving, made my stomach tighten. The ordinary explanations were fraying. Something wasn't right. I tried to back up slightly, easing the car away from the driveway. The man didn't flinch. He took a single, measured step toward me. My pulse jumped. Rationality wavered. He wasn't just stepping, he was moving with intent, and it felt as though he had anticipated my every move. I slammed my foot to the accelerator, tires spinning on gravel as I swung the car around in a wide arc. The figure froze, then followed, not with speed, but with a patience that made my skin crawl. Each movement of mine was mirrored in his slow, purposeful steps, like a predator studying its prey. I risked a glance at what he held. A hammer. Its head glinted under the weak porch light, catching my eye, and my stomach sank. I floored it, heading back toward the main road. Gravel sprayed, engine roaring, branches scraping against the side of the car. Rational thought had abandoned me entirely. This was no confused homeowner, no harmless mistake. The way he moved, calculated, deliberate, patient, was impossible to ignore. My pulse thundered as I navigated the narrow curves, tires squealing on loose asphalt. The driveway receded behind me, but I risked one more glance. He remained in the garage's shadow, perfectly still, the hammer gripped loosely in one hand. But the way he lingered, the patience in his stance, the certainty of intent, it burned into my mind. I didn't dare slow. I drove as if the night itself were chasing me, finally emerging onto the main road. Streetlights spilled over asphalt, ordinary and familiar. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station, engine running, hands shaking violently, heart pounding against my ribs. Rational explanations offered no comfort. Police investigated the house the next day. No one was home. No signs of anyone living there. No hammer. No evidence. Just an empty driveway and a closed garage door. I survived. I escaped. But I will never take that road again. Every time I pass a side street in the country, my mind conjures the image of that figure stepping from the garage, hammer in hand, waiting. Patient, deliberate. And I know that if I had hesitated even for a second, if I had paused to rationalize it, I would not be here to write this. Somewhere, he waits. Always patient. Always watching. I had been driving for hours, the rhythmic hum of tires on asphalt my only companion, the highway stretching ahead in monotony broken only by occasional trucks and flickering streetlights. My plan was simple: visit my friend's cabin in a rural town for the weekend, leave behind the city and its noise. I liked the solitude, the emptiness of the road at night, the way it made time feel slow. The detour was sudden. A bright orange sign read "Road closed, detour ahead," forcing me off the highway onto a narrow side street I didn't recognize. I didn't mind at first. Shortcuts were common in rural towns, and I assumed it would eventually loop me back to the main road. The asphalt was cracked, bordered by houses dark and silent. I slowed slightly as I passed each one, the windows like black voids staring back at me. Rational thought whispered, the residents were asleep, the power could be out, nothing unusual. The GPS had long since lost signal. No service, it blinked mockingly, leaving me dependent on memory and instinct. The side street twisted unexpectedly, the turn sharper, tighter than the map and my mind suggested. Trees leaned inward, branches scratching faintly against the car roof in the breeze. I told myself it was normal, just part of being in a small town. Rational. Safe. Then I saw the intersection. A single streetlight flickered weakly over a four-way crossing, paint faded and lines barely visible. Shadows pulled in the corners, and as I slowed, my headlights illuminated them, 3 men standing in the middle of the intersection. At first, I assumed they were teenagers, maybe loitering, maybe drunk. I exhaled and prepared to drive around them. But as I approached, something about the way they stood, a slow, deliberate stillness, made my stomach tighten. I turned onto the first road to the left, hoping to bypass the intersection entirely. My heart sank. Within minutes, I ended up back at the same spot. The men were exactly where I had seen them before, unchanged, staring, silent. My pulse jumped, rational thought scrambling. Maybe I had misremembered, taken a wrong turn too sharply. I tried the road to the right. The same result. The same dark intersection, the men waiting. Panic began to edge into my consciousness. I tried backing up, retracing my path, but the town seemed to twist unnaturally. Every turn, every detour, every attempt at escape led me back to that intersection. I risked glancing in my mirrors, half expecting to see someone following. Nothing. Yet the sensation of being watched was oppressive, a weight pressing against my chest. Rational explanations offered nothing. Maybe I was tired, overworked, imagining things. The men moved then, slowly. One lifted an arm in a gesture I couldn't understand, deliberate, precise. The others shifted slightly, blocking what I realized now were potential exits. My breath caught. They weren't teenagers or harmless townsfolk. Their movements were too synchronized, too patient, as though they knew exactly where I would go next. I tried to drive straight through the intersection, tires squealing on the cracked asphalt, heart pounding. The men didn't flinch. They didn't even step aside. One of them raised something, my headlights reflected it briefly, a long, thin metal rod. My stomach dropped. Rationality faltered. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't random. I swerved onto a side street, desperately scanning for a way out. The town warped around me. Familiar houses, familiar curves. Nothing looked different, but every attempt ended the same way. I was back at the intersection. The men's silhouettes were sharp in the weak light, patient, unyielding. Their presence wasn't just physical. It felt like a force pressing down, a gravity I could not escape. Hours, or maybe minutes, passed in a blur. Exhaustion and terror blurred my thoughts. Every road, every turn, led me back. I yelled, begged, slammed the horn, but no sound reached anyone. No reaction, no disturbance, just the rhythmic crunch of tires on asphalt and the men waiting. I realized then that I was trapped, not by walls or chains, but by something far older, something patient and deliberate. The thought hit me, I would never leave. No exit existed. Not in this town, not in this night. My rational mind searched for loopholes, patterns, escape, but none appeared. The intersection stretched endlessly, darkness pooling beyond the reach of the flickering streetlight. The men stepped closer, one at a time, their movements deliberate, synchronized, the rod raised higher in one's hand, glinting faintly in the weak light. I screamed, gunned the engine, hoping to break the loop one final time. Tires spun, gravel sprayed, engine screaming. The town shifted, twisted, and I knew I had tried everything. There was no escape. The last thing I remember before the darkness swallowed me was the metallic scent of the rod, the synchronized shuffle of feet, and the overwhelming certainty that I had wandered into something that existed outside reason, outside reality. I was never seen again. Somewhere, the town waits, the intersection still dark, and the men still patient, still waiting for the next lost driver. I had been driving for hours, the rhythmic hum of my tires on the asphalt acting as a kind of white noise. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, a ribbon of dull black under the dim glare of my headlights. My plan was simple: reach my cousin's cabin in the country before nightfall and enjoy a quiet weekend away from the city. The roads had been ordinary, the occasional truck or passing car a minor interruption, and I felt a comforting sense of solitude in the late evening drive. The detour came suddenly. A bright orange road closed detour ahead sign forced me off the main highway and onto a narrow side street I hadn't intended to take. I shrugged it off, assuming it was a shortcut through the town. The pavement was cracked, bordered by old trees that pressed close on either side, their branches scraping faintly against the car roof and the occasional gust of wind. I told myself it was normal, rational, safe. For a few minutes, the side road seemed harmless enough. A few old houses passed by, dark, unlit, silent. Their windows stared at me like black eyes. I slowed slightly, my gaze lingering on them, but told myself it was ordinary. People were asleep, the electricity could have been out. I should have turned back then. I didn't. My GPS had lost signal hours ago. No service blinked mockingly at me, leaving only memory and instinct to navigate. Fatigue pressed at my eyelids, and the monotony of the road, combined with the darkness, started to fray my nerves. Shadows in the trees seemed longer, branches reaching out as if trying to grab the car. A chill ran up my spine, but I tried to convince myself it was just the evening air. Rational. Ordinary. Safe. Then I saw it, a flicker of light in the distance. I slowed, squinting through the darkness. A gas station, faintly illuminated by a single, weak overhead light. I exhaled, relief washing over me. I hadn't realized how tense I'd become until that moment. Finally, a human presence. A place to ask directions, maybe refill the tank. The station looked abandoned at first. A single pump, paint peeling, the station sign swinging slightly in the wind. I pulled up to the pump, shut off the engine, and walked toward the small convenience building. The bell on the door jingled as I entered. The interior smelled faintly of gasoline, dust, and something else I couldn't identify, a tangy, metallic scent that made my stomach tighten. Behind the counter stood an attendant, a man whose face was pale under the flickering fluorescent light. He wore a uniform that looked decades old, faded and frayed, as though he had been standing behind the counter for a lifetime. His eyes were dark, deep, and fixed on me in a way that made my stomach knot. "Evening," I said cautiously. I just need directions. I'm a little lost." He didn't answer at first, just stared. Then, slowly, he leaned forward, the fluorescent light catching the edges of his face in a harsh line. "You can't leave," he said. His voice was low, smooth, but edged with something I couldn't place. "Not until you pay for what you owe." I laughed nervously, trying to mask the sudden panic crawling up my spine. I don't understand." "I haven't." "You owe," he interrupted, still watching me. His hand rested casually on the counter, but I felt it as a threat, a weight pressing down, impossibly heavy. "Everyone does. You can't leave without paying." I tried to back away, moving toward the door. Rationality screamed at me. This is just a man trying to scare me, maybe some small-town eccentric. But the air seemed thicker now, pressing against my chest, slowing my movements. I glanced toward the door, but the handle seemed farther than it should have been. He stepped closer, silent, deliberate. The fluorescent light flickered again, casting shadows across his face that warped and stretched in impossible angles. "It's your turn," he said, almost casually, and I felt the words sink into my bones. I retreated toward the pumps, my mind racing. Every explanation, misunderstanding, joke, hallucination collapsed under the weight of what I felt in the air, an almost physical oppression that wrapped around me, pinning me to the spot. The smell in the station had grown stronger now, metallic and sour, thick in the back of my throat. I ran to my car, fumbling with the keys, the engine roaring to life beneath my hands. I slammed it into reverse, tires crunching on gravel, and looked up. The door to the station was wide open, but he wasn't inside. I exhaled in relief until I saw him standing at the edge of the pumps, the same pale face, dark eyes, hand outstretched. I couldn't see what he held, but instinct screamed it wasn't good. I floored the accelerator, tires spinning, engine roaring, as I turned sharply and raced back onto the road I had come from. My headlights cut through the night, but when I glanced in the mirror, the station was gone. Not the building, not the pumps, nothing. Just trees lining the narrow road, shadows stretching impossibly long, curling toward me. I tried to rationalize. I must have been exhausted, hallucinating, some kind of trick of light and fatigue. But the feeling of eyes on me, of that impossible weight pressing down, stayed. My pulse pounded, my hands shook, and I realized I had no idea where I was. The GPS remained dead, the road unfamiliar, twisting back on itself in ways that made no sense. Hours or minutes, I couldn't tell, passed in a blur of driving and panic. Every road seemed to loop back, every turn brought me closer to the same suffocating dread I had felt at the station. The metallic tang lingered in my nose, sharp and real. My rational mind tried to convince me otherwise, but I knew the truth. I had stumbled into something patient, deliberate, and older than reason. Finally, exhaustion claimed me. I pulled off onto a side road, engine off, hands gripping the wheel, mind racing. I could feel it then, an impossibility made real. The station, the attendant, the words "pay for what you owe," they had not been dreams, not hallucinations. Somewhere, in some impossible space, I had crossed a threshold. I survived, barely. I found my way back to the highway at dawn, tired, shaken, and knowing with absolute certainty that if I had lingered at that gas station for even another second, I would not be alive to tell this story. I will never take that detour again. And I know, somewhere, the station waits, the attendant waits, patient, watching, collecting what is owed. I had been driving until the sky stitched itself to black, the highway a thin vein of light behind me. I was tired, hands heavy on the wheel, but I wasn't worried. This was the route to my sister's town. A ribbon of orange cones and a hand-lettered detour sent me down a side road I'd never seen. At first it felt like a minor inconvenience, a narrow lane, telephone poles leaning like careful listeners, houses spaced far apart. The trees closed in as dusk deepened, their branches ticked at the roof in a wind that smelled of damp earth. I kept the radio low, counting minutes by the click of turn signals and the soft crunch of gravel. When the pavement gave up and the road turned to packed dirt, I thought about turning around. A bend revealed a flaking sign, "Welcome to Hollowgate Trailer Park," and a row of trailers hunched in the dark. Relief and annoyance mingled. My phone had no bars. I pulled in, thinking a short detour and then back on my way. The place was quieter than it should have been. No music, no dogs, only a distant clink like a tool set down. The air tasted metallic. I told myself people worked nights, that there were ordinary reasons for silence. I eased into a widened patch of gravel to do a three-point turn. Headlights picked out plastic lawn chairs, a rusted swing. A trailer door opened with a slow sigh. A porch light clicked on and a man stood framed in the doorway, thin, long-limbed, hands at his sides. I raised a hand in a polite wave. He didn't wave back. He stepped down and walked to the foot of his steps. Another porch light came on down the row, another figure stepped out. The lights didn't snap together, they came in a slow sequence. The world narrowed to the creak of boards and the hum of my idling engine. I tried to be practical, curiosity, neighborliness, a local gathering. They walked toward the lane. Not hurriedly, not angry, just moving, patient and synchronized as if to a metronome. A dozen became 2 dozen, porches lit like moons and each produced a shape that walked forward. No voices, no gestures of greeting, only the slow approach. They approached not like a crowd but like an arrangement of space kept as if along invisible marks in the dirt. Faces that had looked ordinary in porch light now read wrong, a man in a vest with a slow, precise gait, a woman whose robe fluttered like a flag, a boy whose knees were raw with experience. My mind reached for explanations, noise, a call for help, but the porch lights came on in a steady, deliberate sequence. Explaining it felt like delaying. When the shovel flashed in my headlights, reason offered farming tools as a tidy answer. But the way it was carried upright, blade foremost, felt ceremonial. The child in front of my bumper didn't cry or beg, she was an emblem of stillness. Ordinary objects around them turned into props in a scene I had not agreed to. I tried to edge past them at crawl speed, then reversed. Gravel spat. They mirrored my arc, shifting with tiny, exact steps. They were not haphazard, every movement of mine was answered with a fraction of motion that sealed my choices in place. Panic began to unspool the careful threads of reason. A child darted out and planted herself in front of my bumper, hair plastered to a small head, eyes enormous in the light. She stood perfectly still. I reversed harder, they tightened. I honked. The sound folded oddly. No one flinched. In the rearview mirror, a hulking figure emerged between 2 trailers, carrying something that flashed, metal catching my headlights. Time narrowed to motion and options. I thought of every rational remedy: call someone, open the door and speak, drive slowly to show friendliness, then rejected them. My fingers cramped on the wheel. My throat closed. The metal was a shovel, blade scoured clean. They carried it not like a tool but like a banner. When light struck it, it gleamed like a promise. I floored the accelerator. Tires through gravel. They didn't scatter, they adjusted, sealing lanes, stepping between trailers with quiet choreography. Someone's hand brushed the car's paint as I passed, like a benediction or a claim. I made it back to the highway by luck and speed. The neon of a gas station felt like a hospital lamp. I sat at a pump until dawn pulled the world ordinary again. I called the sheriff. At daylight, Hollowgate looked ordinary. Leaning trailers, a broken swing. The porches were empty. The sheriff suggested a prank, maybe a drunken gathering. He found no crowd, no shovel like a banner. His forms could not contain the choreography I'd seen that night. Weeks later, a small paper ran a short item about a man found in a field off an unremarkable back road, cause of death, blunt force. Coincidence can be a thin thing. I still avoid side streets. Sleep became brittle. I took lit highways, turned around at unlit intersections. Friends told me I was jumpy. I said stress and laughed. That was the rational face. Privately, I checked my locks, replayed the child's unblinking stare, the slow metronome of porch lights, the shovel gleaming like a mark. I survived because I kept moving. The ending wasn't cinematic rescue. It was a blunt, small survival. My tires on blacktop, my breath ragged, the ordinary lights of a gas station making sense again. The trailer park remained on maps, unremarkable by day. I did not return. If you ever find a side road that funnels you past porches where lights go up one by one, don't invent reasons to stay. Don't test your kindness against a place that arranges itself into a blockade. Move. Don't wait to see what they carry. I had been on the road since dawn, the sort of trip that turned the day into a series of small, forgettable motions: exit, merge, coffee, more miles. By late afternoon, I wanted nothing more than to shave off a few minutes and follow the GPS's smug shortest route. It led me down a narrow feeder road I'd never noticed before, edged with chain-link fencing and signs that read "No trespassing" and "Authorized vehicles only" in rusted lettering. Ordinarily, I would have turned back. I told myself shortcuts were practical. I told myself I was in a hurry. I told myself a lot of things because that's how you quiet a creeping unease. At first, the industrial district looked ordinary for an afternoon outside the city. Low warehouses, the occasional loading bay with a rubber curtain flapping, stacked pallets like small brown cities. Sodium lamps buzzed overhead, throwing halos of orange on cracked concrete. The air tasted of oil and hot metal. When a semi idled nearby, I felt a gust of diesel wash over my face and the tiny hairs on my arms prick with static. Somewhere a ventilation fan clicked and clacked with a mechanical patience that made the silence feel ordered. I slowed to check a sign, and a delivery truck rolled up behind me, then another car, then a van. Each of them stayed a respectful distance at first, the way people do on narrow roads. I blinked and kept going. Maybe they were headed to shift change. Maybe this was a crossroads for local traffic. Rational thoughts. Temporary comfort. But as I turned into a tighter alley between two corrugated buildings, the oscillation of headlights in my rearview mirror tightened into a pattern. 2 vehicles, then 3, then 4. They didn't pass. They matched my speed, mirroring me, maintaining a wedge of light like teeth closing. I checked my mirrors more often, the rear view a pool of moving white and red. At the next intersection, I took a left, then a right, trying to shake whatever had latched on. The cluster of vehicles followed. From different directions, as if they had been waiting on every approach. A pickup emerged from the far side of a loading dock, a sedan slid out from behind a stacked container, a van eased away from a side entrance. Headlights appeared like comma marks in the near dark, then resolved into vehicles that fell in line behind me. At some point the lanes narrowed, the buildings leaned over the road like watchful neighbors. I began to feel observed the way you feel observed when a room goes quiet and someone is still cleaning their glass. The big rakes hummed, the vans idled, and every engine note seemed timed to my heartbeat. When I told myself these were drivers who had simply chosen the same route, my throat filled with a thin, dry taste of iron. My rational voice said this was improbable but possible. Another quieter voice tightened its grip and said, "Watch the mirrors." The first direct sign that this was not coincidence came when a vehicle closed the distance on my bumper and then eased in front of me. It wasn't fast or reckless, it was deliberate, as if someone had practiced the exact space to occupy. The driver of that car did not leave a gap or wave me by. They simply held the lane and waited. Another vehicle, a van, took up position to my left. A truck idled behind me and a pickup inched forward to block my retreat. My peripheral vision filled with the shapes of headlights multiplying, surrounding me in a geometric patience that irritated the rational brain with how impossible it was. Panic is often a slow burn until it isn't. I tried to laugh once, a brittle thing, and told myself to be reasonable. These were shift workers. The warehouse doors had timed departures. Anyone could be lost. Then the man in the van leaned out a window and swung a flashlight. He didn't flash it like warning, no, he swept it like a stagehand revealing actors in place. The beam caught my mirror and for a slice of second I saw faces not turned in surprise or concern but arranged, composed, like harbingers. No one shouted. No one gestured for me to move. They simply oriented themselves to me and held position. I tried to back up. Gravel chewed at the tires. The truck behind me matched my reverse and crowded closer. Every route I tried to take was answered by the quiet arrival of another vehicle, appearing from a gap in the stacked pallets or the shadow of a loading dock. I could not tell where they emerged from. I only knew, with a blunt and particular certainty, that they had filled every conceivable escape route with synchronized patience. My phone, dead earlier, blinked with a single bar and then went dark as if the industrial shadows ate the signal. The GPS icon spun, impotent. I felt the distance between option and trap collapse. The human mind scrambles. I considered confrontation and dismissed it because cars were the only barrier between me and whatever those men wanted. I thought about driving straight through the cluster, using the car like a contemptuous battering ram. I thought of staying very still and becoming unreadable. All those choices require resources you don't have when fear gets to your hands first. When one man finally walked from his vehicle toward my driver's door, he did not hurry. He did not shout. He moved with a loose, deliberate rhythm, a casualness that was hardest to rationalize. In his hand he held something long and dark, like a bar or a crowbar, tucked against his thigh, reflecting the sodium light in a dull, hungry glint. The van doors behind him closed like punctuation. The others remained in their cars, engines idling, a ring of lamps around me. He stopped at the driver's side and tilted his head as if listening, not for words but for tone. My window was up, my hands trembled over the wheel. He tapped the metal of my door with 2 knuckles, 3 small, soft sounds, and said, as if reciting a courtesy, "You took the wrong way." There was 1,000 ways to answer. I tried the easiest one. I couldn't have known. I muttered something about detours and GPS and apology. He smiled without humor. "Everyone owes," he said, and his voice folded into the engine hum like a second bass line. The phrase had no context, but it hung in the air like a claim. I threw the car into drive and lunged forward. For a breathless instant a narrow gap opened. My bumper scraped something soft and metallic at the edge of the road, sending a stinging vibration through the chassis. A man lunged and surged after me, not quite catching the fender but catching the rush of air as I passed. The ring of headlights followed, 10 reflections, 20, as though the industrial area had leaked a dozen more unlit cars into the alleys. The stench of oil and hot rubber and acetone punched at my face. I didn't stop. My tires shredded on concrete turned to gravel. The car shuddered, but it kept going. I smashed through a chain-link fence where the road bent toward the freeway, metal protesting in a scream that sounded like a distant animal. I saw the sign for the highway as if through salt in the eyes and steered toward it like a thing hoping for rescue. On the on-ramp I looked in the mirror. The parked cars and men were not there. The road behind me was a flat, ordinary sprawl of warehouses and stacked pallets, empty as if they'd never been. My hand shook so badly I could barely hold the wheel. I took the first exit off the interstate, pulled into a 64-hour truck stop, and sat in the car for an hour, engine idling, counting my breath until it steadied. I reported it at the police station in a voice that sounded small even to me. They checked the logs, called nearby yards, radioed the precincts. No clusters of cars were reported. No missing persons. No one on any camera in that industrial strip had unusual activity. A patrolman told me sometimes people get spooked on unfamiliar roads, sometimes memories mix with fear. His radio crackled commuter nonsense. He handed me a card and recommended I drive more cautiously. I drove home on the main roads after that, avoiding shortcuts like superstitious gestures. The neatness of the answer, my escape, my breath returning, the men gone, was both relief and accusation. I'd been seen, followed, nudged. I had escaped by the slimmest margin and no one could file the right form for that. The shape of what had happened remained sharp in my memory, the choreography of headlights, the way vehicles arrived from different directions as if the lots themselves breathed them out, the man who tapped the door and said I owed. Weeks later, when the city moved on and the world forgot the night, I found 3 long scratches along the passenger side of my car where metal had pulled against paint. There were small flecks of yellow paint in the grooves, sodium lamp pigment, I realized, and only then did the memory coagulate into a simple, terrible truth. I had driven into a place where someone kept not one vehicle but many, and where the act of following from every direction was not accident but design. I had survived. I had my car. I told the story because survival needs witness. I will not take that shortcut again. And if you think shortcuts save time, remember, sometimes the shortest path goes through people who already know how to arrive from every direction. I had been driving long enough that the highway felt like a memory I could reach for and pinch between my fingers. It had been a simple day, errands, a late lunch, a detour sign that promised a faster way home, and by the time the sky went sour with evening I was already impatient, willing to trust any shortcut that threatened to shave 10 minutes off my route. The GPS barked and recalced as we were redirected onto a narrow street that wound between warehouses and backyards. At first it was ordinary. Cracked pavement, a single flickering street lamp, laundry hum on a line that moved like a slow metronome. I told myself the city had neighborhoods like this, forgotten, useful, and that I had simply stumbled into one. Rational explanations felt like ballast. I kept going. The lane narrowed until it became an alley. Chain-link fences scraped my mirrors, trash compactors slept at the edges, a neon sign buzzed intermittently down the block. I saw the wrong turn as a momentary misstep, the sort of thing you shrugged off. There was room to swing the car around. I told myself I'd do a 3-point turn and be gone. I could already see the highway's orange halo in my mind. As I eased forward to make the maneuver, the alley ended in a rusted roll-up gate an arm's length across. It was a dead end, not in any map I'd ever studied. The gate's padlock hung loose like an eye. Beyond it, the backs of buildings were stacked like the ribs of something dead. I put the car in reverse. That's when I heard the footsteps. At first they were nothing, small, uncertain, like someone shifting their weight. Then a flashlight winked against the gutter and settled, a bright star in the dark. A man stepped out from behind a dumpster and into the beam. He was ordinary in the way ordinary things were worst, a heavy jacket, hands in his pockets, boots with mud on the toes. He did not shout. He did not smile. He walked toward the rear of my car and waited, the light rigid in his fist. Another light answered, then another. The flashlights crested the fences and moved like small moons across windows and security cameras, hitting my rear view like nails. Shapes slipped out of doorways and between bins with the same slow deliberation. They came without hurry and without noise, a dozen of them, then 2 dozen, then more, until the alley was ringed with pale faces and mechanical beams. I told myself it was some kind of neighborhood watch. I told myself they were odd but harmless. It was a script I read because the alternative required too much violent possibility. For a few breaths I tried to catalog how many. Do any of them call out? But rationality began to fray under the pressure of their attention. Their light made the space between us a stage. I was the last actor who hadn't yet spoken my line. A voice cut the quiet. "You wrong way, friend." It wasn't accusatory. It was a statement without either kindness or contempt. A man near my passenger door tapped the hood with 2 fingers. The sound was small and unremarkable, but it landed like a verdict. I tried to laugh, sounded like a dry cough, and told him I'd turn around. He tilted his head and the flashlight painted his face in a way that made his eyes unreadable. I put the car in drive and eased forward toward the gate, reasoning that maybe it would lift, that this was some maintenance crew, that they would step aside when they saw the headlights gather. The engine's soft protest died mid-roll. The car lurched and then stilled. The dashboard readouts flickered, like a living thing taken aback. My foot pressed the pedal and felt the hollow slack of the brake beneath it. The whole machine had become stranger than a machine should be. A narrow, adult hand, calloused knuckles, touched my passenger door and then moved along the metal as if feeling for dents. Another hand tapped the tail light. The flashlight beams were not searching for me. They cataloged the car, paint, license plate, the sticker on my bumper that advertises a neighborhood church. They looked, and they took notes with their eyes. I tried the horn. It sounded small and distant. No one flinched. Instead, they changed their spacing, moving in a slow, controlled motion to fill the small gaps between bins and dumpster doors. My exit back the way I'd come shrank under their bodies. They had a choreography, 2 abreast, then 3, then columns forming from shadow. I watched a man cross from one side to the other as if tracing invisible marks in the dirt. When he reached the center, he lifted his hand and the others halted. The movement had the accuracy of practice. My hand shook so badly I couldn't hold the wheel steady. I counted rational things, numbers, distances, the geometry of escape, but the calculation failed against the simple fact of their presence. They were not interested in my explanations. When I mouthed an apology, it was like saying grace in a crowded chapel. "Pay up," another voice said. Closer. Calm. Not a threat, but a ledger entry. "You stopped in wrong place. What do you want?" I asked, voice thin and sharp, the kind of question an animal might make when cornered. The men didn't answer with words. One stepped close enough that I could see the skin under his fingernails was rough. He set something on my trunk, a small leather pouch with a weight inside. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. He placed it there with the businesslike tenderness of someone who had done this before. I felt something like a tide. Impatience tipped into fear and fear into a hard, clear instinct. Move. I jammed the car into reverse and floored it. Gravel spat and the tires bit. A body slid across my head like a shadow. Something heavy thumped against the bumper and the paint shrieked in protest. Someone grabbed the antenna and it snapped with a dry pop. I saw faces in the rearview, calm, composed, almost curious, receding into a halo of light as I squealed past. The pouch skittered and fell from the trunk, disappearing under a shuttered delivery bay. They did not chase, not past the gate. They parted like a curtain, a scene that allowed one frantic animal to slip through and not another. I didn't stop until I was back on the main road, headlights lancing into the whitewash of the city, lungs burning, hands cramped on the wheel. At a diner that smelled of coffee and bleach, I sat and tried to make sense of it, fingers tracing the ragged scratch along the hood where something had scraped. I called the police when they offered. The woman at the dispatcher's desk took notes and promised patrol cars. When officers checked the alley the next day, the gate was locked, the dumpsters in their places, no sign of a crowd. They found the leather pouch. I had left it on the seat when I swore I'd remembered every detail, and its contents were ordinary coins, old and dirty, the sort you might find in a car ashtray. The officer shrugged and said some people kept to their own rules, that urban myths grow where light is thin. He handed me a card. He told me to stay on well-lit roads. I took the advice like a bandage. Months later, I learned by accident that the alley's building had been purchased by a small, quasi-legal towing operation that occasionally rented out parking for off-the-books activity. Someone at the diner said neighbors had called it a collection point, a phrase no one said outright. There were rumors of other drivers who'd been asked for money, local anecdotes without police reports. The possibility anchored itself like an explanation, predatory, organized, patient. I did not go back to check. The scratch on my head remained a pale line, a parallel to the memory. I waxed over it twice and the scar only softened. The last time I drove that way, I took the detour signs seriously and kept my eyes on the highway lights. I survived because I drove through a narrow seam with the kind of clumsy speed that panics even the patient. That is the ending. I went in by mistake. I was corralled by people who had turned watching and waiting into a craft, and I escaped. My body remembers the sting of their hands and the weight of that pouch. My mind catalogs the geometry of the alley like a map to avoid. If you ever find yourself at the end of a lane and the light angles wrong and silhouettes gather where there should be none, don't look for polite explanations. Count your exits. Keep the engine warm. Drive. I was tired enough that the world had gone soft-edged. The last highway exit had been a smear of orange reflectors and a blinking detour arrow. I shrugged and followed it because shortcuts are how you salvage evenings. At first the back road felt ordinary, 2 lanes, cracked paint, maples pressing their dark fingers toward the hood. My phone flashed no service and the GPS drew a blank, but I had landmarks in my head, a church steeple, a grain silo, a turn that would spit me back to the main road. Dusk went thick as I drove. The air smelled of wet earth and pine sap. A barn dog barked once and then stopped as if listening to a farther sound. I kept the headlights low, the car a small lantern slipping between tree trunks. Somewhere I had a stand of poplars open to a clearing. The road narrowed and the pavement soured into gravel. That's when I saw the waving. He was at the edge of the clearing, a lone man with an arm raised high, moving his whole shoulder in a frantic semaphore. From my ankle he looked thin as a silhouette and soaked water beaded like sweat across his jacket. I slowed and killed the music, the car settling with a low vibration. The reflex to help is idiot simple. You see a person in motion and you stop. I pulled onto the gravel shoulder, tilled the engine, and rolled the window down. "Hey," I called. My voice sounded too loud in the still air. "You okay?" He waved his hand again and stepped forward a small amount, as if validating that the car was real. Up close he smelled of river mud and something coppery, blood, or rust, or both. "Help me," he said, voice raw, and I saw then that his left sleeve was torn and dark at the cuff. My rational brain split the scene into tidy possibilities. He'd crashed, someone else was hurt, maybe there were kids in need. The irrational part, the animal part, went quiet because the man's need was obvious. I said, "Do you want me to call?" and my phone scrolled uselessly. "No service," I said. He shook his head and pointed, silent, toward the tree line where the road bent into shadow. I stepped out with my flashlight anyway. Night settles quickly under trees. The beam cut a thin, honest cone. The man's teeth caught the light when he smiled, and the smile was too weary to trust. "Car broke," he said. "Down there." He indicated the curve where I could make out the tail of the road dipping into black. That was when the woods exhaled and other points of light blinked on. It began as a match struck, 2 flashlights catching on trunks, a slow, steady appearing like an arranged constellation. People slipped from behind trees, from the shadow of a low ditch, from where the undergrowth made small hollows. At first I thought they were neighbors, late responders, curious onlookers, but they walked differently. They were not hurried or shouting. They came out in pairs or alone, hands empty or in pockets, faces gray in the direct cone of light. There was no chaos to their approach, only the deliberate, spaced cadence of people stepping into formation. The rational scripts tried to run, perhaps volunteers hunting a lost hiker, perhaps a search party, perhaps a funeral procession gone astray. None fit right. Their mouths were closed. Their eyes had the flat focus of people who had rehearsed stillness. One by one they closed the ring around my car, 10, then 20 people circling so the beams of their flashlights cut across the hood and through my windshield in pale lines. My throat had gone dry. I moved back toward the driver's door and felt suddenly like an actor who'd missed his cue. The man who had first waved at me stood a yard away, hands shoved in his jacket, looking not at me but at the horizon my headlights implied. He said nothing. A woman near him tilted her head and the flashlight picked her cheekbone clean. Her mouth was a thin line. Their breathing was ordered. It seemed choreographed to not startle the night. I told myself aloud, practice sentences you utter to buy time, that I would drive slowly through, that people would step aside. I fumbled with the keys and felt my hands betray me with a tremor I didn't own. The engine answered, but when I slipped the car into gear the wheel juddered against gravel as if someone had shifted the road beneath it. The first man stepped forward, very slowly, and lifted a hand not to wave, but to tap the roof of my car with the butt of his fist, a precise, dry sound. "Phone," he said, voice close enough now that I could smell the river on his breath. "Pay what you owe." It should have been demand and I should have been able to answer with the exact amount of denial. I had no idea what he meant. Instead, my rational thoughts unraveled into fragments. Why would help demand payment? Why silence? Why the formation? I glanced past the headlights into the trees and saw more movement, figures shifting like reeds. I tried to reverse to the main road. Gravel sprayed. The ring adjusted seamlessly, narrowing gaps as if a seamstress were closing a garment. A young man stepped onto the road and planted himself directly beneath my rear bumper. He was too calm for someone trying to stop me. He was, instead, calibrating my options. When I tapped the horn it sounded thin and the sound bent weirdly away, swallowed by the trees. Adrenaline has a way of focusing thought. My lawyer's brain, the part that catalogs options without emotional color, listed actions: collide and run, lock and wait, negotiate. Collide was the only one that didn't involve begging. I rammed the car into drive, aimed for a gap that might open between two flashlights. The Vanishings seemed closed just as I reached it. Something, an arm, a shoulder, smacked my passenger side with a wet thud. My side mirror folded under the impact. They did not scream. They did not curse. When the car lurched forward, someone pressed a hand flat to the hood as the vehicle moved and slid along it like a placard, fingertips stinging my forearms through the glass. I felt the scrape of metal that would show later, like a signature etched into paint. I drove until the trees thinned and the road spit me onto a familiar shoulder. Only when the halo of town lights broke the horizon did I allow myself to look back. They stood in a ragged line where the gravel met the tree-line, flashlights held steady like lighthouses. The first man, the one who'd waved, raised his arm once, not in farewell but in address, and then turned away. I called 911 from a gas station. My hands still shook so hard the words came clipped. A patrol came, and another, and an officer with eyebrows that narrowed in a way that meant he'd seen enough nights to file me under stories. They returned with flashlights and flyers and a radio static that tasted like authority. In the morning they combed the road, tire ruts, a folded side mirror, a smear of something dark on the hood. A few footprints led into the trees and then stopped at a rank of compressed leaves where the earth had been trodden smooth as theater stage. The police found more than that. Cameras on a nearby industrial gate had recorded a handful of people pacing the lot across several nights, small groups that gathered and disbanded, leaving the gravel complainant and quiet. A woman came forward later with a story about a friend who had disappeared on a back road a month before. Her description matched one of the faces in the footage. A sting was organized. A sweep pulled several people out of a trailer park 6 miles away. They wore the same habit of patience when the cops interrogated them: flat answers, rehearsed silence. The local judge called the pattern organized extortion. It was sordid rather than supernatural. That thought was a kind of mercy. The alternative would have been some ineffable lingering. The men in the trees, I was told, were not ghosts but predators who used the town's geography and the silence of its edges like a trap. They'd learned to make a cry for help into a lure. They made themselves a rule: situate, encircle, demand. They called it a toll. They called it survival. I still sometimes wake with my hands clenched around a phantom steering wheel. The hood still wears the crescent of a smear that wouldn't come off in the car wash. The police closed the case to their satisfaction: arrests, charges, court dates. The news printed a short piece and then moved on. I survived because I kept the engine warm and because, in a moment of thin, sharp instinct, I chose impact over politeness. That is the true ending, not a tidy moral, not a haunted explanation, but the fact that wrong turns sometimes meet people who will make them cost you, and that the only definitiveness you can count on is the distance your tires can buy you if you hit them hard enough. The detour sign was small, an unassuming orange square taped over the GPS arrow, and I followed it because I was tired and because I liked the idea of shaving 5 or 10 minutes off the trip. The shortcut took me away from the neon smear of the interstate and down a string of side streets I'd never bothered to remember before: warehouses with sheet metal siding, a church with its parking lot half full, a row of cheap duplexes that smelled of fried food and damp carpet when the wind shifted. Ordinary things and ordinary sights make you careless. My phone battery sat at 12% and the signal flickered out as I turned onto a narrower lane. No service blinked like an accusation. I pulled into a gravel lay-by beneath a rusting street lamp and killed the engine to consult the paper map I kept in the glove compartment, a limp rectangle I'd once promised myself I'd never need. The night pressed close, the lamp above me sputtering and making the street's shadows look like they'd been brushed with oil. I had intended to be quick. The map was the sort that smelled faintly of newsprint, the lines of the county like little rivulets. My fingers brushed the crease where a fold had cracked. The metal taste of anxiety was already present in my mouth. As I leaned over the map, my phone gave a soft, final click and died. The last numbers on the screen winked out like embers. I told myself my route, said the street names under my breath, traced the road with my thumbnail. There was a human comfort in small truths. I knew the way, or I would find it. The sound came then, soft, too discreet to be anything but deliberate, the whisper of a seatbelt being fastened, the faint clack of metal. I looked up without thinking and saw through the rear window the silhouette of someone lowering themselves into my car. The motion was as quiet as a shadow folding. For a fraction of a second I thought it was a child playing at stealth. Sane possibilities stacked themselves like dominoes: prank, mistake, a friend from college with a cruel sense of timing. The person moved with an ease that made my skin go cold. When he buckled the strap, I heard it click, and the sound landed in me like proof. I stood up too fast. The map fluttered to the gravel, and the flashlight from the street lamp left my hands in a useless halo. He reached for the dash, fingers long and steady, and in that small, effortless motion he stole my agency. "Hey," I said. It came out unnecessarily soft. The man did not turn his head immediately. He didn't need to. The interior light bled a weak red from the dome and made his face a smear. When he finally looked at me, there was a small, patient smile that did nothing to reassure. "You shouldn't leave your car running," he said, as if chastising a neighbor. My rational mind sputtered. Maybe he'd mistaken my car for his, or maybe he was drunk and intended only to warm the engine. My rational mind is good at building fortifications of reason when I most need them. My phone's dead. I'm just checking the map, I said, moving sideways, palms up, the universal human gesture for non-threat. He glanced at the map lying in the dirt, then at the phone on the passenger seat with its blank face. He locked the car with a key I couldn't see. The noise, small, absolute, confirmed what my skin already knew. This was not a mistake. "Close the door," he said. The voice was ordinary, low, and precise. Behind him, the world narrowed to the faint rustle of the grasses at the margin of the lot and the distant leak of a highway somewhere I couldn't see. My hands were too slow. I had no weapon beyond the map and a half-empty water bottle. I thought of throwing the map into his face, of slapping at the steering wheel the way you might try to stall a flow of water. I thought of all the films and overconfident fantasies I'd once stored up, and none of them fit the moment. He was already doing the thing people do who have rehearsed intimacy with a place. He scanned my glove compartment, found the registration, folded it back into its envelope, and slid the small slip into his pocket. Efficiency has a vocabulary. Dust a hand for prints, pocket the evidence, remove the option. "You don't want to make this hard," he said. "Give me the keys." That was not a question. 100 rational explanations evaporated at his tone. The idea that he had been following me, waiting for a place where the asphalt widened and I would be distracted, settled like dust in the air. The map under my fingers crinkled like an old animal. I reached for my keys with trembling fingers. They felt too big in my hand, heavy with normality. He leaned forward and placed his palm over mine, a containment more than a grab. His skin was cool and smelled faintly of machine oil. "No sudden moves," he murmured. It was not really a warning, it was a ledger entry. I tried bargaining, the way you do when all options are bad. "I have cash," I started. "I can call." The phone lay dead, mute and useless. Behind his shoulder a figure moved, soft, silent, enough movement to remind me that he was not alone. My eyes snapped to the side window and I saw, reflected in the glass, other shapes, a darkened pickup backed into the shadows, someone crouched near its rear tire like a statue. The lay-by had a dozen hiding places, and each one conspired to make me a small thing in a large clan. He let go of my hand and sat back, folding his fingers over the steering wheel as if it were a ledger. "You're late on something," he said. "Everyone is." There was a peculiar civility to his tone, as if we were reading the weather together. Panic is a loud animal. I heard it throttle in my ears. My chest worked, my vision narrowed to the bright blue of my car's blinkers and the way his knuckles whitened where they rested on leather. Then the man did something that felt like theater. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a thin, black radio. He pressed a button and spoke a phrase so neutral it cut under me. It was a signal, and somewhere in the dark others answered with the rustle of movement. "Stay," he said into the radio, then turned back to me. "We'll be quick." He lasted a heartbeat more as a nurse in my fantasy. Then he turned the key, and the engine answered with a healthy, legal life that made the whole car seem suddenly malevolent. The crackle of the dome light hit the windows and outlined faces beyond the glass, 2 more men, 2 more shapes, stepping forward with the casual, rehearsed calm of people who have done this before. This is the point where the rational mind tends to note the ways out, slam the door, run, scream. But my options had already been banded. The doors locked with an unceremonious electronic tick that sounded to me like a judge's gavel. I did the only thing that did not require courage, only a small, selfish clarity. I climbed into the passenger seat, because staying outside meant being a target walking into a plan. His smile was thin when I did. He tossed my keys onto the passenger side and watched me pick them up. His eyes were flat, predatory in the reserved way of a man who counted the pace of a world in invoices. "We take people's cars sometimes," he said, as if explaining weather patterns. "You should watch where you stop. Night is a long place." He started to back out of the gravel lay-by with a slowness that was rude and deliberate, the headlights washing the trees in front of us. I banged on the window with the side of my fist, then pounded the passenger door. He glanced at me like someone watching a show. There was no compassion, only a businesslike appraisal. I had the keys. I could have tried to turn the engine and drive. I could have risked the physics of sudden movement, the way two people in a small metal box manage weight. I thought of sleights of hand and the ethics of survival and the way desperate acts feel in the mouth. Instead, I did something simpler, because it was the shape of the only certainty left to me. I reached into the pocket of my jacket and found the small, cheap multi-tool I kept for opening packages. My fingers had learned the curve by habit. I slipped the blade between the door frame and the lock, a childish, fumbling thing, and felt metal give. That sound of the click was small and miraculous. It was the noise of an unlocked world. He was watching my hands the whole time, but he was also attentive to whatever frequency his companions cried into the radio. People who work in gangs rhythm their attention poorly. Everything that keeps the scheme together is taut, but the seams are where single hands can slip in. When the door popped, his smile fell like a curtain. He braced, but I was smaller and faster in that cramped piece of metal than he expected. I wedged my elbow against his arm and shoved. The car lurched and the door opened a few inches. My shoulder rammed into him and the movement rattled teeth. He reached at me, an animal motion, and I shoved harder, the car bumping along the gravel as his weight shifted. The radio spurted and a voice barked, not words I understood, but urgency threaded through. From the corner of my eye I saw headlights flaring as someone ran from the trees. Someone else had decided to come the other way. I hit the road barefoot, the gravel biting my soles, and ran until my lungs burned and the hill refused to give me speed. I ran toward the orange wash of the highway and the cadence of other drivers, and the sound of my own breathing became a thing I could count. A truck screeched, a man leaned out and shouted, and the world refolded into ordinary motion. I was shaking, my palms raw from the door, my jacket torn. I told the police who I could descriptions of faces that accrued like small facts and watched them write and nod with the professional calm of people who have cataloged similar evenings. They found the car 3 days later, abandoned at the far edge of a lot, doors open, my radio tuned to nothing. The registration had been run through a dozen hands. There were fingerprints on the dash that didn't match mine. They arrested 2 men when they pulled up a tow yard video, faces that had drifted like ghosts, then resolved like actors caught in the light. Papers signed, charges pressed. The police called it a ring, an opportunistic operation picking people who stopped to check maps or call home. I kept the dent where his knee had hit the glove compartment as proof on my car's interior, and I kept the smell of engine oil on my nostrils for a long time. Rationality returned in the form of police reports and court dates, the small legality that turns a story back into a series of actions. The truth was prosaic and ugly. Someone had used the darkness and my inattention to slip into a role and take my life forward without me. I survived because I pushed it weight and because, when a seam opened, I fought through it. The men went to court. One gave a statement about needing money, the other about desperation and habit. No phrase could close the shape of that night. The ending was concrete: arrests, restitution, and the slow, stubborn reassembling of a life that felt, for a while, like a cracked vase glued in a hurry. If there is a lesson, it is not a moral trite enough for a billboard. It is simply this: wrong turns make you small and visible, and ordinary things, maps, phone batteries, the kindness that stops for people on the road, are the very things someone else will plan around. I learned to keep both hands on the wheel and to trust the glow of a 24-hour place. I learned, cleanly and finally, how quickly a quiet man can slip into your life and try to drive it away. I was tired, the kind of tired that makes small decisions feel like they require courage. The highway had been clogged with brake lights and the GPS glitched on a detour. I followed the hand-lettered sign that pointed down a country lane because the alternative was to sit and fume. At first the shortcut felt exactly like that, short. Hedgerows leaned in over the tarmac, the smell of cut hay opened and closed, and farm dogs barked somewhere a long way off. The lane shrank until it was single width, the painted lines gone, the asphalt pocked with gullies that hummed beneath the tires. I kept my speed low. You learn to trust the rhythm of these roads, slow when the bends come, stop in the passing places, see to anyone with a light on a hill. My rear view showed nothing but hedgerow and the orange smear of sunset. Then 2 headlights ballooned, small at first, and settled into place behind me, one vehicle, tail lights patient in my mirror. I found comfort in the obvious explanation, another local, another driver making the same decision. The pickup drew close. At first it was a considerate following distance, then too close, a bar of light that sat under my bumper like a second skin. I glanced at the rear view and saw a wide grille closing the lane, too much of a presence in that narrow corridor. I signaled for a passing place that appeared at a bend and pulled over, leaving a small gap between my mirror and the hedge. The pickup braked, held, then accelerated and shoved up the tarmac with a motion so precise it read like intent. Its fender nudged my back quarter with a metallic kiss that made the car shudder. I honked, more from habit than hope. A thin, deliberate laugh answered through the open window as the heavy thud of a diesel engine followed. The pickup pressed forward and the back of my car rocked. Gravel cracked like old teeth. When I tried to creep forward into the little lay-by, the truck moved to block me, settling sideways across the lane until its rear wing left no path. The driver climbed out with slow, clean movements that suggested this had been rehearsed. He didn't shout. He stood with his hands in his pockets, inspecting me as if I were a clock to be wound. Up close you could see the lines at his eyes and a silence meant to set the mood. Beside him, another pickup eased out of a shadow and parked across the lane, then a third pulled up, doors yawning like animal mouths. They arranged themselves with a calm geometry, fronts touching hedge, tailgates outward so that the lane was a human-locked corridor. Rational explanations stacked themselves in me, road rage, a man with a grievance, kids playing a mean joke. I told myself the simplest, make small talk, apologize, move on. I put the car in reverse to back out slowly. The first pickup matched my motion, then bumped the rear bumper with a careful force like fingers closing a book. It was not reckless, it was a practice pressure designed to box me into the lane. The second man walked up and leaned on my hood as if we were neighbors swapping gossip. "You took the wrong turn," he said without heat. The phrase sounded ordinary until you saw the way he meant it. It held the certainties of billing. I dialed 911 with fingers that refused to be steady. The call rang, a clean tone, and then the line whispered dead static. The single bar indicator on my phone mock smiled and died. The mash of community I depended on unraveled. The men exchanged glances like clerks agreeing a total. They did not ask for money at first. The first man, broad-shouldered, with the easy restraint of someone who expects obedience, walked slowly around my car and tapped the mirror, the door, the roof, as if taking inventory. The touch of his hand on metal was casual and personal. In the side mirror I saw the face of his companion. No hurry, no contempt, only the practiced detachment of someone who had done this before. When he finally opened his mouth, it was to name a price. "You pay for the lane," he said. Not a demand, not a theft, a tariff. An account to be squared. 15, and who'll let you go? I laughed because disbelief felt lighter than fear. "I don't have that," I started. "Put what you have in the pouch," he said. He produced a small leather bag, slapped it on my hood with the casual exactness of a hand that does not tremble. The other men circled, pocketing their phones in deliberate silence like witnesses tucking away evidence. I did what people do when time narrows to a single, urgent arithmetic. I emptied my wallet into the pouch, cards, crumpled bills, a receipt for coffee, and shoved it back through the partially lowered window. The first man counted with slow fingers, eyes like a ledger. He tucked the cash into his jacket with a clerk's neatness and handed back a single bill folded into a receipt, route, time, amount. "Keep moving," he said. His voice had the flat finality of a clerk stamping a form. When I reversed, the truck blocking my line didn't lurch to cut me off. It slid, like a door opening, just enough to let my bumper through. But the men did not smile or mock. They stepped aside as though they had done what needed doing. The pickups idled, engines a low, obedient thrum. The lane yawned open and I drove as if I were leaking. Later, at the safety of a gas station, hands trembling and the leather pouch closed beside me on the seat, I called the local police and spoke in narrow breaths. They were patient on the other end. They told me to come in and file a report. I sat under fluorescent light and wrote the details, handed over descriptions that felt crude and inadequate. 3 pickups, plate numbers half remembered, a pouch, a folded receipt with a scrawled sum. The investigation was methodical. Officers combed the lane's verges at dawn and found tire tracks and scuff marks where the pickups had boxed my car. A patrolman caught one of the license plates on a traffic camera an hour later as the trucks dispersed toward a cluster of farm sheds. Within a week, 2 arrests were made. The men were part of a small ring, local, opportunistic, using the loneliness of secondary roads as a ledger for extortion. The word on the police blotter was minor but precise. I was given forms to sign and a case number and told to keep the receipts. The detective spoke quietly about deterrence and patrols, and he told me, almost kindly, that my response had likely prevented worse. Compliance had kept me alive in a way brute force sometimes does not. That was a strange comfort. The truth was less cinematic than I had feared. No mythic chauffeur, no occult logic, only men who learned the geometry of lanes and the psychology of isolation and practiced a quiet, administrative cruelty. The ending was clean and conclusive. I had been forced off the road, I had paid, I had driven away, and the law had pursued them in the morning light. They were charged with assault and extortion. The records were public. I still retell it the same way because facts are the thing that slog the fear down into something you can manage. Sometimes I find myself glancing at my mirror on a narrow lane, imagining the metallic notch. The gouge on my rear quarter is a small, honest scar that catches the sun. I live with it. I survived. That is the ending. I got away. I told the story, and the men who used the quiet of the road as currency were put on notice. I had been steering for 2 hours through the slow, indifferent miles that sit between towns, the kind of driving that unbuttons your thoughts and leaves you easy to mistakes. The detour the GPS suggested was only a line on the screen, a thinner ribbon than the highway, and I told myself I was saving time when I turned. For the first half hour everything felt minor: cracked blacktop, a rooster call from a yard, an old pickup parked with its tailgate down. The sun slid behind the trees and the world cooled into a blue that made every shadow look like an eye. After a while the road pinched to a single lane, with farm fields sloping away on either side. Barns started to pass, big red ones, weather-bleached ones, one squat concrete structure with a silo that leaned like an old man. The barns kept repeating in a way that made my stomach tighten, not the exact barns, but the same small details cropping up over and over: the sagging porch swing at the Mitchell place, the missing plank by the eastern door of the Turtle barn, the barbed wire loop hanging from a post like a question mark. I shrugged it off as exhaustion. GPS errors loop roads sometimes. People build their houses in grids, and I had driven a square without noticing. On my third pass the first person stood in a barn doorway. He held himself like a nailed board, feet planted, shoulders rigid, staring at my headlights as if they were a thing that could be studied. He wore an old coat and a hat pulled down, and his face was pale in the light. When you are alone on a road at dusk and someone appears, your reflex is the same as a dog's: you look for what they need. I slowed and flashed my brights, mouthed "You okay?" and felt like an idiot when he didn't move. He simply watched me, unblinking. I told myself the sensible things. He was a farmer, perhaps checking animals. Maybe he'd seen a break in a truck. It made sense for a while. Then, on the next loop, there was someone else in the doorway of the concrete barn, a woman this time, and on the loop after that a boy, arms folded, chin up. Every barn had someone in it. Each person stood in the same rigid way, like a sentinel. Not one of them waved, not one of them called out. Their attention was all aimed at the lane. I tried to keep my voice small and practical. Anybody need a lift? Do you need me to call someone? My phone, of course, announced no service. The map in my lap was a folded island of ink that meant nothing out here. Rational excuses piled up, maybe a local festival, a charity drill, and then the facts pressed in. My mirror showed the same stretch of road, repeatedly, and every time the barns returned they had a person framed in their doorway. There were no cars parked. No lights on inside. Only those faces in the threshold, waiting for me. A chill tracked along my forearms. I tried to turn onto a side lane I thought would lead back to the highway. The road angled but spat me out like a pool ball ricocheting off rubber and wood. I drove harder, as if speed could disassemble the circuit. The barns and the watchers held their places and seemed to lean forward a degree. Their faces took on detail in the sweep of headlights, a hollow near a temple, a scar down the cheek, the small, awful clarity of eyes that do not blink when you expect them to. Panic takes shape slowly. First you try to be reasonable. I parked and wrote down the names on a mailbox, trying to anchor place to word. I stopped at a farmhouse with a light still on and knocked. No answer. The lamp above the porch hummed steadily, shadows pulled under the lip of the roof. I stepped back to my car and the road was full of barns again when I looked up, as if the world had folded and stacked itself differently while I counted my breaths. By the time the hour mark arrived, the rhythm was a drum. Each circuit drew more watchers into the doorways. Their numbers multiplied like a pattern emerging on a loom. They did not move off the threshold. They did not shout or wave me away. They made no sound. It was their silence that was loudest and organized, earned hush that felt like a thing trained into muscle. I told myself the police would understand me if I could just get out of that circle and reach them. I found a number and dialed, and for a moment the phone held a connection, a woman's voice asking for location, then it fizzed into static. The line died like a candle snuffed. When I passed the Mitchell barn for maybe the 10th time, the man in that doorway had shifted his weight. That small motion made him terrifying. He stepped down from the threshold and into the yard without changing the expression on his face. One by one, other figures followed, the barn doors arranging a theater of people who had only ever known one stage. They moved as if practiced to do so, a slow, careful closing of the space the lane offered. I slammed the accelerator. The tires protested and threw gravel like spray, the engine keening. They did not scatter like startled birds. They walked toward the lane and kept walking, forming a line that threaded the fields where the fence met the grass. Light swept across shoulders and faces. Each person tilted his or her head the same way when I roared past, following me, measuring me with a patience that made my skull ache. I tried every sane response, reversing, flashing, honking, pleading through the lowered window. The most basic civility failed me. "Please," I said, a single small animal sound, "please let me through." A woman's voice, smooth and steady, floated from the line as if wound on a hidden spool. "You came the long way," she said. "You were counted." Whatever that meant had the weight of ritual in it. I saw, for the first time, the signs I had not seen, the little piles of stone stacked near the gate of a field, the painted mark on a fence post repeated in intervals I had mistaken for weathering. The watchers had the patient geometry of people who turn a pattern into a rule. They closed in. A boy ran out and stood directly in front of my bumper and did not cry or shout. His eyes were empty, in the way of someone very young or someone who has practiced being very still. Hands touched my hood as the line closed, light catching on rings and calluses that read like tokens. The soundtrack of the night narrowed to the rubbing of denim and the low, resigned rustle of leaves. I had one option, the rawest animal choice left, force. I put the car into gear, lashes flicking with fear, and gunned the engine. Gravel sprayed. The boy's shoulder flashed at the edge of my panic and my bumper clipped him. His body slid along the hood with the sound of wet paper. I cannot unknow the way silence folded at that moment. He did not fall as if broken. He rolled and stood as people in this place had rehearsed doing, as if the state of motion was their property and not mine. Someone touched the hood where his body had passed, felt the metal as if checking the temperature of something that had belonged to them. I kept driving. I passed fields that had been quiet an hour before and now held rows of watchers in their doors. The same faces turned to follow me until I was a moving point of light. By the time the county road rejoined the highway, I was howling with the motor and shaking with the aftershocks of breath. The bright street lamps of the main road felt obscene in their normalcy. At the first open diner, I pulled in like a man jumping from a burning room. Hands still trembling, I told the clerk what I had seen. He listened with the flat, careful attention of someone who hears tall tales at 2 a.m., then slid a cup of coffee in front of me as if a hot, caffeinated thinness could stitch me back together. He called a deputy. They went out in the morning. They found nothing in the barns. The doors were empty, brooms leaning where they had always leaned, a stray horseshoe by a feed bin. But they took my report, and later that week a farmer from the area came into town with a photograph pressed into his fist. A surveillance camera near a grain elevator had caught a ring of people moving from doorway to doorway at dusk on 3 successive nights. The deputy I spoke to after that called them lookouts, and said they had been preying on nighttime travelers for months, corralling and sometimes robbing, sometimes worse. A small ring of arrests followed when the local courts took notice. That was the truth, recorded and legal, human, organized, cruel. It was both comfort and indictment. I had been counted and let go, apparently, because I had forced motion through their choreography and escaped. The thing that would not leave me was not the knowledge that they existed, but the image of a dozen faces, blank and patient, forming a border where the dark met the road. I could say what I had learned: watch your maps, avoid single lanes at dusk, but the real lesson was narrower and stranger. In that county, on that back road, people had learned to stand like doors and to make a wrong turn mean you belonged to them. I keep the scuff on my bumper. It is a thin, stubborn white line that catches the sun and reminds me that the world can arrange itself into traps with the same ease it arranges itself into roads. I survived. They were ordinary enough to be charged. But sometimes, late, when my headlights cut a span of countryside and the trees make small theater, I see, reflected in my mirror for just a moment, the posture of a man standing in the dark and realize I drove through someone else's counting. That is the end. I left that night with my teeth clenched and my wallet heavier by fear, and the county learned how to catch its own. I was tired enough that the highway had become a thin, forgettable thread. The GPS chirped a detour and I turned without thinking. Shortcuts felt like competence after a long day. The side road narrowed, trees knitting overhead, and the neon of a weathered sign read vacancy. A motel. Convenient. Practical. The office light blinked and went out as I pulled into the crescent of parking. The glass door latched with a soft click. The lot smelled of warm tar and old coffee. I checked the window, a lonely register, a bowl of mints, a hand-lettered notice, and no check INS after 9. My watch said 9:07. Bad timing, I told myself, and stepped back toward the car. That's when a curtain upstairs twitched. Then another. The motel's second-floor windows were a row of pale rectangles, and each curtain shivered a fraction. Not a draft, the lot was still. The movements lined up like a metronome. I reasoned, people peeking in, a vent, someone adjusting blinds. Rationality soothed for a breath and then failed. The curtains didn't open, they only quivered, as if watching. I moved closer. The fluorescent light hummed and made the building look like an old photograph. A man emerged near the vending machine, denim jacket, hands knuckled by work. He didn't smile. He stood in the light and listened, then lifted his hand, not to wave but like a conductor cueing an orchestra. The curtains answered, an exact small start that made the skin at the back of my neck prickle. "Is this place open?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "You came through late," he said, voice dry. "People watch from their rooms. They don't like strangers." He offered no more hospitality. The office remained locked, the register closed. My rational brain tried another tack. Maybe a family had a reunion, maybe a repair crew. Each explanation had holes the size of molars. The man shrugged, and the curtains twitched again. A detail snagged me. Every doorknob faced inward except two near the office, where the knobs turned outward. "Local custom," he said. I nodded, because people nod instead of thinking when comfort feels thin, and went back to my car. I sat with the engine running like a pulse and tried to leave, but headlights flared. A pickup at the lot's edge breathed out and a sedan slid from behind a hedge, nose blocking the lane. The crescent had rearranged itself into a small arena with me in the center. I called 911. The line rang with a crisp, hopeful sound and then collapsed, no signal. My phone, which had shown a sliver of life, went dead. The man by the vending machine watched me dial without expression and then tossed a cigarette in a practiced arc. The smoke drifted into the lot and made the light look filmy. The curtains did something then I could no longer translate as human. They parted the faintest fraction and a shape leaned into a slit behind the fabric, and I caught my light and did not blink. Doors opened with soft, synchronized motions. People emerged in pajamas and jackets, stepping to their thresholds like actors onto a stage. Ordinary clothes, ordinary faces. Their eyes cataloged me with the flat attention you give a ledger. "You're on our road," said a woman with a receipt pad, voice even. She held out a slip that read room fee, passage paid. Nearby, a man presented a stubbed pad and a stubby pencil. The gesture felt clerical rather than criminal, protocol, not threat. When I told them I had nothing, they did not argue. A girl took my keys with casual efficiency and dropped them into a small metal box. Coins and cigarette packs and a folded note were offered back in palms like change from a till. The denim man read aloud the stub and stamped it with the slow finality of a clerk. "Pay the fee," he said. "We don't like strangers in the Crescent." I tried to leave. I turned the key, the engine coughed and died. I tried again, nothing. The dome light popped and blackened. The motel's fluorescent strip hummed as if amused. They advanced in a slow, geometric line and then halted at the parking island, hands out as if conducting a transaction. There was no shove, no raised voice, only the practical choreography of people who had made a trade of keeping watch. They left me a choice: walk. The grounds were small, the highway was a dark seam on the horizon. A man kept pace a respectful distance behind me, another shadowed the shoulder of the road. The curtains gave themselves a last little flutter of attention, and then settled. I walked until the motel sign was a pale notch behind me and my phone woke with one bar. I called the police from the highway and told them everything: curtains, receipts, the metal box, the way they took my keys like clerks balancing a till. At dawn, officers returned to the motel and found a dozen people arrested, protesting mildness, receipts stacked in a shoebox. They found the metal box with my keys, slips of typed paper, and a ledger scrawled with times and amounts. The desk register showed no check-ins after 9. The owner had authorized nothing. The prosecutor called it extortion. The judge called it criminal. Names were taken, bonds set. The motel closed for a week to be scrubbed, cameras installed. There was nothing supernatural to record. The curtains had twitched because human hands had pulled them, The watching eyes had been human eyes. The true horror was administrative. A small community had learned to convert a deserted crescent into a toll booth, turning strangers' confusion into revenue. They had a system, signals, parked cars, a pad and pencil, a metal box. The ledger was paper and the ledgerers were ordinary people. I survived because I walked and because the law eventually found a pattern to break. I kept the stamped slip in my wallet for months, a tiny rectangle that smelled faintly of plastic and fear. I stopped taking detours at night. I fill the tank before the light fades. I trust the blue line only when it stays on well-lit roads, and sometimes, late, when the wind is still, I hear a curtain twitch in memory and realize how easily ordinary places can be made into instruments. The ending was prosaic: arrests, paperwork, patrols, but the memory remains, a row of curtains moving in metronome time and a dozen ordinary faces arranging themselves into a ledger. I drove a wrong turn into their crescent and, by motion and luck, I came back out. I was exhausted when the GPS chirped and insisted I take the faster route through a patch of country roads I'd never traveled. The highway had been crawling with traffic, brake lights blinking like red warning beacons into the growing dusk. I followed the detour, thinking a little backroad shortcut couldn't hurt. At first, it was exactly that, ordinary. Narrow asphalt, telephone poles casting long shadows, a farmhouse here, a cow pasture there. I passed a small creek, then a bend in the road, and suddenly the bright, buzzing sign of a gas station appeared. Not on my route, exactly, but perfectly convenient. I slowed as I pulled in. The station was one of those old rural places, the kind with a single pump, faded paint, and a narrow awning. Outside stood a man in a worn denim jacket, leaning against a post like he'd been counting something. His gaze lifted as I drove in, trained, precise. I parked, glanced at the GPS again, and then looked at him. He straightened slightly, then crouched, glanced at the pump, then back at me. Counting. I laughed nervously, muttering, "Weird guy, huh?" My rational brain shoved aside the feeling in my gut. Maybe he worked there. Maybe he liked to watch cars pull in anything normal to explain it. I turned the wheel to leave, GPS recalculating, and the road led me in a tight curve back to the same station. The man was in exactly the same place, counting. The light from the pump glinted off his wrist, and I could have sworn he had a notebook, though I couldn't see clearly. My pulse hit a staccato rhythm. Maybe I missed a turn. I tried again, left, right, even a U-turn, but each exit funneled me back to him. Counting, watching. A shiver ran down my spine. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it. Exhaustion, I whispered. You're tired. But the sun had dipped behind the hills, the sky a bruised purple, and the station's fluorescent lights hummed a little too long. The man's head tilted as I approached. I could feel his eyes tracking me. I parked and got out. He didn't move toward me, didn't speak. He simply raised one hand, extended a finger, and seemed to silently gesture at the GPS. The absurdity of it should have been funny, but the gesture was too precise, too controlled. It was a warning. I got back in the car and tried again. Left, right, a U-turn, always the same. Always the station. Always him, counting. The GPS now seemed almost malevolent. It recalculated with each attempt, leading me back like a predator herding prey. My hands shook on the wheel. Then the headlights appeared behind me. One car, tailing from the moment I first pulled onto the detour. I tried to accelerate, but the road's turns were sharp, unfamiliar. The car followed, not closely, but with the patience of someone who knew I had nowhere to go. I slammed the wheel into a side road that seemed promising, only to find myself back at the station again. And now, more people were standing outside, scattered like sentries. I could see 4, maybe 5, each one observing the cars, raising a finger in silent arithmetic. They were counting cars, counting me, counting time. I started the car, frantically trying to force it forward. The engine hesitated, coughed. I had not noticed the pump hose lying across the asphalt, coiled as if deliberately placed. My tires caught the rubber, slid, and the engine stuttered. One of them stepped closer, slow and deliberate, without fear. I locked the doors, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. Rational thoughts competed with the dread building in my chest. Maybe it was a prank. Some small-town cult. But there was no humor here. They weren't laughing. They weren't hiding. They were calculating, observing, and letting me realize there was no escape. I tried my phone, still nothing. No bars. No calls. Nothing. The world outside the car shrank to the asphalt, the glowing sign, and the figures who now seemed to have multiplied. More men, more women, spread along the lot like a slowly closing net. The one I'd first seen raised his finger again, then tilted his head in what felt like instruction. Panic seized me. I forced the wheel left, a sharp turn onto the gravel, tires scraping, heart hammering. The GPS recalculated, cheerfully and cruelly, and spit me right back. I slammed on the brakes. They had moved closer, circling the car, silent, patient. Counting. Always counting. I yelled, "What do you want?" My voice cracked in the cold night air. The first man stepped forward, and I saw his face clearly for the first time, calm, unreadable, entirely human but without empathy. "You owe the road," he said. Just those words. No explanation, no emotion. "You came here. It counts." Then I understood, this was never about directions. It was about control, about being forced into a pattern, about a tally where my freedom was an entry. And it was my turn to be counted. I tried to escape again. Tires spun on gravel, headlights flashing across denim and boots. But each exit led back. Each turn returned me to the same lot. The night swallowed me. The counting increased, voices whispered numbers just beyond comprehension. My body trembled, a puppet to roads that refused to let me go. When the police finally came hours later, though it felt like days, they found the gas station empty. No one outside, no pumps active, no tire tracks besides mine. The lot was deserted. There were no surveillance cameras, no receipts, no evidence of anyone. I drove home in silence, windows up, engine screaming under the effort. The GPS now showed the highway clearly, unthreatened, open. But I never took another shortcut. I never went down a rural back road again. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I see that station in the distance, a flicker of neon, a figure counting cars, waiting. I survived, yes. But every road, every turn, is haunted now by the memory of being counted, endlessly, until the night itself seemed to tally my fear. It was just after sunset when I left the highway, following what I thought was a shortcut. My phone's GPS insisted I turn onto a thin, overgrown path, one of those roads that had probably been paved decades ago and then abandoned to weeds and piles. The air smelled faintly of wet earth and dying leaves. My tires crunched along gravel and broken asphalt, and the trees pressed close on either side, letting only the last rays of sun dapple the hood of my car. At first, everything seemed ordinary enough. The road narrowed, twisted, and the shadows grew long, but it was quiet, peaceful almost. I told myself I was just being cautious. Back roads have their charms. I noticed an old mailbox, leaning, with peeling paint, and a rusted fence disappearing into the brush. The GPS recalculated a few times, but I didn't worry. I assumed the path simply meandered before rejoining the main road. Then I saw the car. A dark sedan, hazard lights blinking, abandoned or so it seemed. It was parked crookedly, front wheels turned into the weeds, one door ajar. My chest tightened, but I told myself people break down all the time. I slowed, pulled over, and put my flashers on. My car felt suddenly exposed, the path more constricted than before. I stepped out and called out. "Hey! You need help?" No reply. The air was still, the only sound the faint rasp of leaves in the wind and the creak of an old branch overhead. I circled to the driver's side, peering in. No one. Empty. Keys in the ignition. The radio was dead. My stomach sank. Maybe someone had left in a hurry. I backed up a little, deciding to call the police and report a stranded vehicle, when movement caught my eye. A shadow, tall, solid, just at the edge of the tree line behind my car. My pulse quickened. I glanced around. No other cars, no lights, nothing. The shadow shifted. Someone was there. And they were holding something. A crowbar. Black and steel, worn handle, resting casually in one hand. My mind scrambled for rational explanations. Maybe a passerby, maybe someone trying to help. But the way he stood, still, patient, like he had been waiting, made my chest tighten into a ball of dread. My hands trembled on the hood of my car as I realized I had no escape. The path behind me was overgrown. Turning around meant backing straight toward him. I fumbled for my keys and slid back into the car. The engine roared to life like a lifeline, but the crowbar's holder didn't move. He simply stepped forward, slow, deliberate, emerging from the shadows with each step. Panic clawed my throat. I threw the car into gear, tires skidding over gravel, trying to turn onto a side path, but roots and ruts caught the wheels. He was closer now, the metal of the crowbar catching what little light remained, reflecting a dull, dangerous gleam. I tried to stay calm, to think. Rational explanations ran thin. Maybe he's crazy. Maybe he just wants money, I told myself, voice tight, trembling. My grip on the wheel was white-knuckled. Hazard lights of the abandoned car flickered behind me, but it didn't matter. Nothing behind me was safe. Nothing in front offered relief. I slammed my foot on the gas, forcing the car over a slight rise. He froze for a heartbeat, then ran. Not toward me at first, he ran parallel, cutting me off, keeping pace. My headlights caught his eyes, dark and unblinking, fixed on me with patience and cruelty. I tried another turn down a narrow fork in the path, a chance at distance, but every turn seemed to trap me back in the same clearing. The hazard-blinking car, the trees, the crowbar-wielding figure, it was like the forest itself had bent to funnel me toward him. I considered abandoning the car, but the ground was soft, rutted, and the crowbar made that choice unthinkable. Each heartbeat thumped like a drum of doom as I edged forward, trying to force momentum, tires gouging the dirt. He advanced steadily, step by measured step, until I realized the horror of the moment. If I slowed, even for a second, he could reach me. If I stopped, even for breath, the crowbar would swing. A final rational thought pierced through terror, momentum. I floored the accelerator, tires spinning, engine screaming, and aimed for the only gap between two leaning trees at the edge of the clearing. My car leapt over the roots, scraping branches against the roof, and I didn't look back. The figure stumbled at the edge, maybe trying to anticipate the motion, maybe simply caught off guard. I barreled down the old path, adrenaline and fear keeping the engine alive when it wanted to die. The trees thinned. The overgrowth gave way to the remnants of an old service road, wide enough for 2 cars. I didn't slow. I didn't breathe. I drove until the orange glow of a highway exit appeared in the distance, lights spilling like salvation. When I finally pulled over at a gas station miles later, shaking, heart hammering, I called the police. They told me the path I described didn't exist in any official records, and the abandoned car had no reports filed. They were polite, skeptical, and efficient, but their reassurance felt hollow. I drove home in silence, the crowbar and the shadow burned into my vision. That night, and every night since, I replay the path in my mind. The sound of tires crunching gravel, the gleam of steel in the dark, the patient step of someone who has been waiting for hours, or maybe days. The shortcut doesn't exist on any map, but the memory does. And sometimes, when I drive after dark, I see a flash of metal at the edge of the woods and remember that patience has teeth, and terror can be deliberate, calculated, and patient. I survived. But every unfamiliar path now carries the weight of that crowbar, the inevitability of being counted, and the knowledge that some wrong turns are permanent.